The most powerful woman in the room was dying, and not a single person with a medical degree, a black card, or a corner office moved to help her. Evelyn Cross, 30 years old, worth $11 billion, the kind of woman who made men twice her age flinch in boardrooms, was choking to death between the appetizer and the entree while 47 people watched. 47 people who had collectively redefined what it meant to be successful in this country. And every single one of them froze. Everyone, except the quiet man in the corner booth who nobody had bothered to notice all evening. He was already moving before her wine glass hit the floor. If this story already has you leaning in, hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this one travels. Now let's get into it. The reservation had been made under a different name. That was the first thing Mark Reynolds always did when he took Emma somewhere that required a reservation. Not because he was hiding, exactly, or at least that's what he told himself on the drive over, watching his daughter press her nose against the passenger window and fog it with her breath while the city slid past in streaks of amber and white. He did it out of habit. Out of the particular kind of caution that becomes second nature when you've spent enough years in environments where a name on a list is a liability. "It's fancy," Emma announced, as if this required documentation. She was 8, and she said most things as if they required documentation. "It's a restaurant." "A fancy restaurant." She turned from this window and looked at him with the particular expression she had inherited from nobody. Both her parents had been quietly serious people. This wide-eyed, slightly accusatory delight. "You wore the good jacket." "I wear this jacket all the time." "You wear the other jacket all the time. The one with the zipper that sticks." "This one doesn't have a sticky zipper." She tilted her head. "Why does this one not have a sticky zipper?" "Because I take care of it." "You should take care of the other one." "Thank you, Emma." She turned back to the window, satisfied. "You're welcome." Ardent was the kind of restaurant that occupied the ground floor of a converted bank building in the financial district, the kind where the ceilings were high enough to make sound behave strangely, and the lighting was calibrated to make every woman look like she was being painted and every man look like he was about to close a deal. The menu had no prices on the customer-facing copy. The sommelier wore a jacket that cost more than Mark's monthly rent. There were fresh flowers on every table, white and architectural, the kind that looked too perfect to have grown anywhere. Mark had chosen it because Emma had spent 3 weeks doing a school project on honeybees and their relationship to specific flower varieties, and because she had mentioned, once casually, the way children mention things they care deeply about, that she'd seen a photograph of white ranunculus in a book and thought they were beautiful. He'd noticed. He was good at noticing things. It cost too much. He knew it cost too much before they sat down and the menus arrived without numbers on them, and he felt the familiar low-grade discomfort of a man who has chosen to live within his means, sitting somewhere that had been designed specifically for people who had too many means to count. But Emma was looking at those flowers with the expression she reserved for things that genuinely moved her. Quiet, a little reverent, her head tilted exactly the same way it tilted when she read a passage in a book that hit something real. And so it was fine. It was worth it. Almost everything was worth it, when the variable in the equation was Emma. They were seated in a corner booth near the back, partially obscured by a support column that had been wrapped in dark wood paneling. Mark had requested it. The host had understood without explanation. There was something about Mark that communicated, to people who paid attention, that the corner booth was not a preference but a requirement. Not aggressive, just settled. The way a man carries himself when he has decided exactly how much of himself will be visible at any given moment. "Can I get the duck?" Emma asked, studying the menu with the focused intensity she brought to everything. "You hate duck." "I've never had duck." "You watched a duck video last month and cried." "That was a different duck." She lowered the menu slightly. "This one is already..." She made a small gesture that encompassed the kitchen, the concept of cooking, the general nature of things. "You want the duck?" "I want to try the duck." "Okay." She beamed at him. Fast, bright, gone as quickly as it came, already back behind the menu. He watched her for a moment, the way he often did when she wasn't looking, cataloging the specific miracle of her. The dark hair that was always slightly uneven because she refused to sit still for haircuts. The ink smudge on her left index finger that was permanent at this point. so far as Mark could tell. The way she held a menu too big for her with both hands, elbows on the table. An 8-year-old who ate at places like this with the composure of someone who had been doing it for years. She hadn't been. They hadn't been. But she adapted. She always adapted. It was possibly the thing he was most proud of in a life that had required a great deal of adaptation from both of them. He ordered for them both. He ordered the duck. He ordered himself the lamb, not because he particularly wanted lamb, but because it was the second cheapest entree, and he was already doing the math in his head in the particular compulsive way that men who have been broke at some point in their lives never fully stop doing, even when the account is stable, even when the emergency fund exists, even when the immediate crisis is not financial, but is in fact duck. The restaurant was full. That was the other thing Mark noticed, before anything else became relevant. He noticed it the way he noticed everything in enclosed spaces, but not paranoia, just awareness, the kind that had been trained into him over years until it became ambient, like the way a musician hears harmony underneath sound that other people experience as noise. He noted the entrances and exits. He noted the table arrangements, the flow of foot traffic, the position of the staff. He noted the table near the front, not the very front, not visible from the street, but prestigious enough to signal something, where a woman sat with 3 other people who were clearly staff masquerading as dinner guests. She was the reason for the staff. That was obvious. She had the particular quality of stillness that very powerful people sometimes develop. Not peace, exactly, but the stillness of someone who has learned to contain the amount of space they take up because the alternative is exhausting and they are very tired of being watched. She was young. Younger than he would have expected for someone who commanded the kind of attention this restaurant had clearly calibrated for. She was wearing dark clothing, minimal jewelry. Her hair was up in a way that looked effortless and had probably taken 15 minutes. He noted her. He filed her. He turned back to Emma, who was explaining the life cycle of the honeybee to him with a precision that suggested the school project had been, by any reasonable measure, a success. The queen doesn't actually run anything, Emma was saying. People think she's in charge, but she's basically just laying eggs and everyone else is making the decisions, which is kind of a sad life if you think about it. Or maybe she's fine with it. Maybe she likes laying eggs. Emma looked at him with the specific expression that meant she was considering whether this was worth the energy of a rebuttal. Dad, she's trapped in a hive. She literally cannot leave. That's one interpretation. It's the biological interpretation. Fair enough. The food came. Emma's duck arrived, and she stared at it with the complicated expression of someone reconciling principle with appetite, then tried a bite and said nothing, which meant it was good and she wasn't going to admit it. Mark's lamb was fine. The wine he'd ordered, 1 glass, because he was driving, because he was always driving, because there was always a child in the car that was his responsibility, was better than fine, which he appreciated and noted and didn't let himself indulge in too heavily. He was pouring Emma a 2nd glass of sparkling water when it happened. The sound came first, a sharp, high gasp. Not dramatic, not movie choking, nothing like the way people imagined it from television, just a short, cut-off intake of breath that ended wrong. The kind of sound that a throat makes when it has stopped doing the one thing a throat is supposed to do. Followed immediately by the particular sound of a table being grabbed, silverware rattling, the specific noise of a woman trying to stand up and discovering that her body had already made a decision about whether standing was currently possible. Mark's head was already turning before the silverware finished settling. The woman from the front shell, the young woman who had the stillness of someone practiced at not being looked at, was on her feet, both hands at her throat, the universal signal that something was terribly wrong that most people spend their whole lives knowing about and never reacting to in time. Her face was wrong. Not dramatic, not performative, but the particular wrong of a body in genuine distress. Lips going wrong. Eyes panicked in a specific way that was different from social panic, different from embarrassment, different from the manageable panic of a bad situation. This was the panic of a body saying, this is it. This is actually it. The people at her table, the staff pretending to be guests, were already doing exactly what untrained people do in emergencies. The man directly across from her had pushed back his chair. The woman to her right had stood up. They were looking at each other. They were looking at her. They were performing the cognitive loop of people in crisis. Someone should do something. Why isn't anyone doing something? I should do something. What should I do? Someone should do something. The rest of the restaurant had done what restaurants do when something goes wrong. That peculiar suspended moment where 40-something people all collectively hold breath and wait for permission from each other to respond or not respond, to look or not look, to act or remain in the comfortable fiction that nothing is happening. It lasted approximately 3 seconds. Mark was out of the booth in 2. He crossed the restaurant in a way that he did not think about and could not have narrated. The path presented itself, and he took it, around the edge of a table, through a gap between chairs, stepping around a server who had turned at the sound and was standing with a tray half raised, the way people hold things when they've forgotten they're holding them. He was behind her before any of the 3 people at her own table had moved toward her. Up close, she was taller than she'd looked seated. Her hands were still at her throat. She was trying to cough, and nothing was happening, which was the relevant information. Not a partial blockage, not a close call, something lodged and not moving. He didn't ask if she was okay. She was clearly not okay. "I've got you," he said, and his voice came out the way his voice always came out in situations that mattered. Flat, calm, carrying exactly the weight of the words and nothing else. Not reassuring in the performed sense, reassuring in the functional sense. "I've got you meaning I am here and I know what I'm doing and we are going to fix this." He positioned behind her, one hand finding her sternum to locate the xiphoid process, fist positioned correctly, the technique embedded so deeply from field training that it bypassed conscious recollection and simply happened. One arm wrapped around her. He could feel the tension in her body, the involuntary resistance of a person who is terrified and being grabbed from behind by a stranger, the complicated override of fight instinct that was making this harder than it needed to be. "Stay with me," he said. "Don't fight it. Breathe out." She couldn't breathe out. That was the problem. But her body heard him anyway. Some essential animal trust that functions below the level of reason. The part of a person that recognizes competence even when the brain is too panicked to process anything. And she went marginally less rigid. First thrust. Nothing. Second, he felt her body jolt with it, felt the specific resistance and give of the maneuver done correctly, felt the involuntary gasp that meant airway movement. Third, the piece of food, a small, dense cylinder of what had apparently been a compressed scallop preparation, the kind of architectural cooking that marks expensive restaurants, hit the white tablecloth with a sound that nobody there would remember accurately later, but all of them would describe. And Evelyn Cross drew a breath like someone surfacing from deep water, ragged and enormous, and the most beautiful sound in the room. Mark stepped back immediately. She was bent over the table, hands flat on the surface, breathing, just breathing. Each inhale audible and working, each exhale a little less desperate than the one before. Her 3 table mates had finally converged, the man from across grabbing her shoulders, the woman to her right saying her name, the third person already on the phone. The restaurant, which had gone completely silent in the way that spaces go silent, when everyone in them understands that something real just happened, was beginning to exhale. Someone near the back made a sound. Not a word, just a release of held tension. A server dropped something that clattered. The ambient noise of a space with 40-plus people who had been holding their breath and were no longer doing so. Mark was already moving back toward his table. He got there before anyone in the restaurant had redirected enough attention to establish clearly where he'd come from. He sat down. Emma was looking at him with an expression he recognized. Not frightened exactly. Emma wasn't easily frightened, but alert in the way she got when something important had happened and she was processing it. "Is she okay?" Emma asked. "She will be." You did the..." Emma mimed. Not the Heimlich, but the shape of the action, the way she'd seen it demonstrated in the school safety video she'd narrated back to him in detail 3 weeks ago. Thing. Yes. It worked. It did. Emma looked at the woman at the front table, who was now seated again, surrounded by her people, a ring of concern. Then she looked back at her father. "Should we go tell her we're glad she's okay? She has people with her." "But..." "She's fine, Em. She has people." He picked up his fork. "Eat your duck." Emma looked at the duck. She looked at the woman. She looked at her father. This was the particular triangle of Emma's attention when she was working something out. He recognized it, had learned to wait it out without rushing her toward a conclusion. She was 8, and she thought like someone considerably older, and she arrived at things in her own time. "You don't want her to know it was you," Emma said. Not a question. He met her eyes. She looked back at him, her expression patient and precise. "We're in the middle of dinner," he said. She held his gaze for another moment. Then she picked up her fork and ate a piece of duck and said nothing else about it, which was one of the things he loved most about her. That she could put things down when she needed to, even when she wasn't finished with them. Mark Reynolds had not been nobody for very long. That was the thing that people who met him now, the neighbor who waved from the driveway, the other parents at Emma's school, the guy at the hardware store who'd helped him with the bathroom tile, would not have been able to guess from looking at him. He presented as a quiet man, medium height, not imposing in the way of men who cultivate imposingness, but solid in a way that was different from imposing. The solidity of someone whose relationship to his own body is entirely functional, never decorative. He had the kind of face that was forgettable by design, not by nature. Dark eyes that caught things. A habit of stillness in crowds. He had spent 12 years as a Navy SEAL. He had gone in at 20, which was not unusual, driven by the particular combination of things that drove men that direction at that age. Something to prove. Somewhere to put the energy that didn't fit cleanly into civilian structures. The specific pull of wanting to matter in ways that were concrete and measurable. He had been good at it. Not legendary, not the kind of good that becomes myth, but the deep, quiet good of someone who does the work every time and doesn't make it about themselves. And in the SEAL community, that kind of good was understood and valued in ways that didn't always translate to external recognition. He had done deployments. He had done the things that deployments required. He had come back from them with the particular adjustment that the work demanded. Not broken, not in the way the narratives tended to go, but rearranged in certain ways that were permanent. His relationship to stillness changed. His relationship to noise changed. His understanding of what was essential versus what was performance had been stripped to something elemental and durable. He had met Caroline 7 years in. She was a nurse practitioner, practical, dark-humored, impatient with sentiment but generous with the actual substance of care. The kind of person who would never tell you that everything was going to be fine, but would absolutely sit with you through the parts where it wasn't. They had not been well-suited in the ways that a life like his made well-suitedness difficult, but they had been real with each other, which was harder to find and worth more, and Emma had arrived 4 years into the marriage and changed the architecture of everything. Caroline had died when Emma was 2. Ovarian cancer, found late, managed with the particular combination of hope and pragmatism that Caroline had brought to everything she did, 14 months from diagnosis. Mark had been stateside for most of it. The Navy had accommodated this, within limits, and he had lived inside those limits and outside them when necessary, and had said goodbye to his wife on a Tuesday morning in November while Emma slept in the next room, not knowing. He had left the Navy 8 months later. Not from grief, or not only from grief. It was more that the calculation had changed irreversibly. He had done the accounting that needed doing, what this life required, what Emma required, what was possible given the intersection of those two things. The answer was clear and not painful in the way he'd expected. He was 30. He had skills that translated. He had a daughter who was going to grow up with one parent, and he had decided, with the simplicity of someone making a decision that will never need to be made again, that the one parent was going to be present. He had moved them to Portland, Oregon, which he had chosen for reasons both practical and arbitrary. Cost of living manageable, good schools, access to outdoor space that Emma took to with a fervor that suggested she'd been designed for it, and no one he knew. The last thing wasn't a drawback. It was part of the plan. He did private security consulting, intermittent contracts, the kind that kept him local, corporate security assessments, risk mitigation, the occasional short-term protection detail. It paid enough. It kept his skills from going entirely soft. It let him be home for dinner most nights, which was the metric he had decided to organize everything else around. He had been doing this for 6 years when the scallop happened. But he paid the bill in cash, which he did everywhere out of habit, and declined dessert menus for both of them on the grounds that Emma needed to be in bed within the hour, which was true, and that he wanted to be out of the restaurant before the woman at the front table recovered enough to start looking around, which he didn't say. The restaurant had largely resettled by the time they left. The table near the front was still occupied, the woman surrounded by her people, the sommelier hovering at a respectful distance, someone who looked like a manager stationed nearby with the expression of a man calculating liability. She was speaking in a low voice to the man across from her. Her posture had changed. She was holding herself differently than she had been before, like someone who has touched the actual bottom of something and come back up and is now trying to locate exactly what they're standing on. She didn't see them leave. Or if she did, she didn't register that there had been anything to see. Emma took his hand in the parking garage, which she still did in parking garages because she found them unsettling and had decided this was reasonable rather than babyish, a distinction she had drawn at age 6 and which Mark had never challenged. They walked to the car. Emma was quiet in the way she got when she was thinking through something real. He started the car, pulled out of the space. "Dad?" Emma said. "Yeah." "You weren't scared at all, were you?" It wasn't a question either. The questions that weren't questions had always been the ones that got him. He drove for a moment, watched the exit ramp come and go, the city opening up around them, the particular weight of night in a city that was different from night anywhere else. "I was focused," he said finally. "Scared is when you don't know what to do." "I knew what to do." Emma considered this. "Is that what they teach you?" "Partly. What's the other part?" He thought about it honestly, which was the only way he knew how to think about things. She asked directly. "Practice," he said. "You do something enough times that there isn't space for anything else when it matters." She was quiet for a long time after that. The city moved past them, all its light and noise, and Emma sat in the passenger seat with her hands in her lap and her face turned slightly toward the window, and Mark drove through it with the particular feeling he got sometimes in the middle of ordinary things. The feeling that this was the actual substance of a life. Not the events, but the in-between. Not the moments that would make good stories, but the ones that were real. "The duck was good," Emma said, as they hit the bridge. "I know. I'm not going to say you were right. I know. But it was good." "I know, Emma." She leaned her head back against the headrest and looked out at the water moving below the bridge, black and reflecting, the city lights dragging across its surface. "That woman's going to wonder who you were," she said. "Maybe. She's going to want to find you." "Probably not." He kept his eyes on the road. "People's lives move on. She has people around her. She'll be fine." Emma turned her head and looked at him with the specific patience of a child who loves you and knows you're wrong. "Dad," she said, "she was dying and you saved her. People don't forget that." He didn't answer. The bridge opened up ahead of them, and Portland sprawled on the other side, modest and wet in his, and Emma let him have the silence because she was 8, and she had already figured out that sometimes the truth didn't need an argument. He thought it would end there. That was his genuine assessment, going home that night, getting Emma through her bath and her 2 pages of reading and the negotiation about what constituted sufficient teeth brushing, sitting on the edge of her bed while she asked him one more question about the SEAL program, because she'd been on a Navy history kick for the last month and always saved the real questions for right before sleep. "Did you know you were good at it, like when you first started?" "No." "When did you know?" He thought about it. "When I stopped thinking about whether I was good at it." She processed this. "That's kind of like the duck." "Go to sleep, Em." She went to sleep. He went downstairs and sat in the kitchen for a while with a glass of water and did not look at his phone and thought about almost nothing. The woman had people. She was fine. The moment had happened and it was over, and tomorrow was Thursday, and Emma had a book report due Friday that she had not started, and they needed milk. He was wrong, of course, but he didn't know it yet. By the following morning, it was on the internet. He didn't know this either at first. He drove Emma to school. He went to the hardware store. He came home and replaced the failing seal on the kitchen faucet, which had been on the list for 2 weeks, and ate lunch standing at the counter because he had nowhere to be until the afternoon. He was a man who had constructed a life that was small by design and large by the only measurements he cared about, and in that life, internet moments about restaurants happened to other people. He found out because of Daniel. Daniel Park had been in his unit, one of the 3 people from that entire chapter of his life that he stayed in contact with. Not frequently, not with the performed closeness of men who had survived things together and needed to keep performing it, but genuinely, the way you stay in contact with people who know you before you learn to manage what you show. Daniel had stayed in the Navy, picked up rank, and remained, by his own assessment, a person who thought nothing of forwarding things he found relevant. The text came at 2:17 in the afternoon. "Hey, this you," followed by a link. Mark looked at the link for a long moment before he clicked it. Some pre-conscious part of him had already assembled the likely shape of what waited there, the way it always did when information arrived. The footage was from a phone, shot from across the restaurant, shaky in the way of someone filming on a device they'd grabbed without thinking, the instinct to document arriving about 4 seconds before the instinct to help. The angle was oblique. You couldn't see his face clearly, just the side, the back of his head, the silhouette of his shoulders and arms, and the specific economy of the movement. The woman at the center of the frame, the moment before, the moment after. The sound was ambient restaurant noise, and then the gasp, and then the silence, and then the sound of her breathing. 12 seconds. The caption under the video read, "Billionaire heiress Evelyn Cross nearly dies at Portland's Ardent restaurant. Mystery man saves her life and disappears before anyone can thank him." Who is he? It had been viewed 2.3 million times. Mark set his phone down on the kitchen counter. He stood very still for a moment, his hand still resting on the phone, looking at the middle distance where the wall met the window and the afternoon light came in at the particular angle it came in on this side of the house in October. Then he picked the phone back up and typed, "Not me." He set the phone down again. It buzzed 30 seconds later. Daniel. "Sure, how's Emma?" "Good. Book report due Friday. She gonna do it?" "Probably Thursday night." "That's your fault, probably." He left it there. He went back to the kitchen faucet. He tightened the new seal, ran the tap, watched it not drip, and felt the particular satisfaction of a mechanical problem resolved, which was clean and complete in a way that the other thing was not. Evelyn Cross. He had not looked at the caption carefully enough the first time to register the name, but he registered it now. He had a vague impression, the kind of vague impression you accumulated from existing in the world, from the ambient noise of finance news and business coverage that drifted through even a life specifically organized to minimize it. Cross Technologies. The daughter. The one who'd taken over at 26 and turned something that had already been large into something that required new language to describe. He thought about Emma saying she's going to want to find you. He thought about the way the woman had held herself at the table, that practiced stillness, the cost of it, the specific exhaustion of someone who had been important for long enough to know what it required. He thought about 2.3 million views, and the way that number was not a ceiling. He put the tools away. He cleaned up the cabinet under the sink. He went and sat on the back porch and watched the sky do what the sky did in October in the Pacific Northwest, layered and gray and indifferent to individual events, and accepted the particular shape of the situation with the calm of someone who has learned that acceptance is not the same as passivity, and that the correct response to an incoming situation is to let it come and decide when it arrives, not before. He would be fine. Emma would be fine. People's lives moved on. He would reflect later, not with regret exactly, but with the specific humility of a man who has been precisely wrong, making the same mistake he'd spent 12 years training other people not to make, confusing his preference for an outcome with an assessment of its probability. Evelyn Cross was not the kind of woman whose life moved on. She was the kind of woman who found things, and she had already started. The breathing exercises her doctor had prescribed were 3 minutes long, and Evelyn Cross had never once completed them. She would start. She would sit in the chair by the window in her apartment on the 14th floor, the one that looked out over the city in the particular way that expensive views looked out over cities, at the skyline's best angle, filtering out the parts that complicated the picture. She would close her eyes and begin the count, and by the second minute something would surface. A number, a deadline, a name, the specific texture of a problem that hadn't been solved yet. And the counting would stop because counting had never once solved a problem, and she would be back at her desk before the 3 minutes finished. The morning after the restaurant, she sat in the chair and made it all the way through. She didn't do it correctly. She kept opening her eyes. Her breath kept catching on the inhale, not from panic, but from the physiological remnant of the previous night. Her throat still felt wrong in a way she couldn't fully articulate, a kind of soreness that was partly physical and partly something else, partly the ghost of the specific terror of a body that has been close to the edge and knows it. But she sat there. She finished the 3 minutes. She looked out at the city, which was doing what Portland did in October, gray and quiet and indifferent. And she let herself be in the chair for a moment without making it useful. Then her phone started, and the moment was over. Marcus Webb had been her head of security for 4 years. He was 51, former Secret Service, built like a man who had once cared very much about physical fitness and now cared about it professionally rather than personally, with the specific quality of someone who had spent decades managing threats and developed the disposition of a man who assumed, at baseline, that most things were a threat until demonstrated otherwise. He was also, and this was the thing Evelyn had needed to learn about him over time, almost always right. "I've seen the footage," she said before he could start. "You need to understand, I've seen it. It's everywhere." She moved from the chair to the window, standing close enough to the glass that her breath fogged it slightly. 2-point-something million. It'll be more by noon. The restaurant has confirmed they have security footage. Better angles. His voice had the specific flatness of a man delivering information he wished he wasn't delivering. "We can work with that." "I don't want to work with it to suppress it." A pause. "I wasn't suggesting suppression. I was suggesting identification." She hadn't thought of that, which was unusual. She was typically 3 steps ahead of most conversations. But she had not slept well, and her throat still felt wrong, and she was, if she was being honest, still somewhat inside the previous night in a way that she hadn't finished processing. "You think you can find him?" "I think we can find him." He moved like someone trained. The way he crossed the room, the technique, that's not a civilian response. "My guy who watches the footage is saying military, possibly special operations. The economy of it." Marcus paused again. "He also didn't stay." "I know he didn't stay." That's the unusual part. Most people, they do something like that, there's a pull toward acknowledgement, toward being seen. He was gone before you had your breath back. Evelyn said nothing for a moment. Through the glass, the city was doing ordinary morning things. Traffic, cloud cover, a crane moving slowly against the sky in the distance. She pressed one fingertip to the fogged spot her breath had made and watched the condensation move. "Find him," she said. "It'll take a couple of days. We have the footage, partial plates from the restaurant's garage camera. He parked in the structure, paid cash, which is interesting. A couple days is fine. And I'll need to run it through a few channels that are going to ask questions about why we're looking. Tell them you're conducting a security review following a public incident," which is true. She turned from the window. The apartment felt too still. It always felt too still in the mornings. It was a consequence of living alone in a space designed for entertaining, all that square footage organized around the idea of people, permanently empty of them. "Marcus, when you find him, I want to be the one who makes contact. Not your team, not PR, not legal. Me." She could hear him processing this. "That's not my recommendation. I know it's not. There are protocols. There are always protocols. Find him." She hung up before he could finish the sentence, which was a habit she was aware of and had chosen not to address because she'd been told it was rude by 4 different people whose assessment of her behavior she took seriously, and the awareness of it had not changed the behavior, which probably said something true about her. She stood in the middle of her apartment and put her hand briefly against her own throat, over the place where the soreness lived. The man had said, "I've got you," in a voice that contained nothing performative, nothing angled toward her response. Just information. Just the simple architecture of a person telling another person that they were not alone in a moment when alone was the most terrifying possible thing to be. She had been held by a stranger, and it had saved her life, and she didn't know his name, and in a life structured almost entirely around the principle that she should know everything relevant to her own existence. That gap was intolerable. The footage hit 5 million views by Thursday afternoon. Mark knew this because Emma, who had been expressly told not to look it up at school, but had done so on a library computer at lunch with the moral flexibility of a child who understood the letter of a prohibition, if not its spirit, came home and told him. 5 million! she said, dropping her backpack on the kitchen bench with the specific weight of someone delivering significant news. Also, there are articles, like multiple articles. I know. One of them says hero or ghost, the man who saved Evelyn Cross and vanished, with a question mark after ghost. I saw it. She looked at him with the particular look that meant she was deciding how to frame something she'd already decided to say. The photo they're using is really blurry, she said. You can barely tell it's a person. That's good. Your shoulders are pretty recognizable. Emma. I'm just saying, to someone who knows you. She opened the refrigerator, studied its contents with the unfocused attention of someone whose interest was not actually in the refrigerator. Mrs. Galvez asked me today if my dad ever went to fancy restaurants. His attention sharpened. What did you say? I said sometimes. She closed the refrigerator without taking anything. She didn't say anything else. She probably doesn't know, but she watches the news. She turned and looked at him directly. How long until someone figures it out? It was a good question. He had been asking it himself, in the background of everything, running the calculation. The footage was blurry. He had not given his real name for the reservation. He had paid cash. He had parked in a garage where the camera angle caught partial plates. He'd noted the camera on the way in, force of habit, and had parked in the row least visible to it, which had been automatic rather than premeditated. But there was the restaurant itself. Staff who had been present, the host who had seated them, the server who had been nearby. He'd paid cash, but a table had been reserved, and the reservation, even under a different name, had required a phone number, and the phone number was a prepaid he'd used twice and retired, which was a level of caution he maintained for professional reasons, and which he now felt the specific benefit of. I don't know, he said honestly. A while, maybe. Or maybe not. He sat down at the kitchen table. Emma, if someone contacts you about this, I don't know anything. I'm 8. Please contact my dad. I was going to say, tell me immediately. Oh, she considered. Also that. The script you gave yourself was good, though. She allowed herself a small private smile. I know. He watched her for a moment. She was handling it with the equanimity she handled most things. Not performing calm, just genuinely steady in the way she'd been since she was old enough to be steady. The specific resilience of a child who had lost something fundamental early enough that it had become part of her architecture rather than a wound. He was proud of her, and he was worried for her, and those two things coexisted in the particular way they always did, quietly, underneath everything. Is the book report done? He asked. Mostly. What does mostly mean? It means the important parts are done, and the parts that aren't done are the boring parts. The boring parts are still parts. She picked her backpack back up. I'll do them after dinner. She paused at the kitchen doorway. Dad, the woman, Evelyn Cross. I looked her up too. I assumed. She's actually kind of impressive. Emma's tone was this careful neutral of someone trying to present information without editorializing and failing slightly. Like, she took over this company that was already huge and made it bigger, but also there are articles about her doing stuff for women in engineering and funding scholarships. She's not just like rich for no reason. Mark said nothing. I'm not saying anything, Emma clarified. I'm just saying she's a real person with a real life and you saved it, and it seems like maybe she'd want to, Emma, say thank you. She held her hands up, the gesture of someone completing a thought they were allowed to complete. That's all. Good night. It's 4:30. For the conversation. She disappeared toward the stairs, and a moment later he heard her bedroom door, not slammed, but closed with intention. The 8-year-old version of having the last word. He sat at the kitchen table for a while with his hands flat on the surface, looking at nothing in particular. Outside the window, the neighbor's maple was doing what maples did in October, going gold and dropping it, the particular extravagance of a tree that has been saving something all year and has decided now is the time. He thought about the woman in the restaurant, not the moment of the emergency. That he'd filed and closed, that was done. He thought about the half second before he'd moved, when he'd looked across the room and registered her face, the specific expression of a person in the gap between the life they'd been living a moment ago and the knowledge that it might be ending. He'd seen that expression before. He'd been on both sides of it. He thought about Emma saying she's a real person with a real life. He picked his phone up and put it back down without opening it. The book report wasn't going to do itself, and neither was dinner, and those were the actual problems in front of him, and he was a man who had decided some years ago to be present for the actual problems. He got up and started cooking. Marcus Webb was thorough. It was the thing Evelyn paid him for and the thing he had never once failed to deliver. In 4 years of working for someone whose life generated more potential security concerns than most small governments. He was thorough in the way of a man who had watched things go wrong from insufficient information and had made a private decision at some point in his career that he would never be the person who didn't know enough. He came to her office on Saturday morning with a folder that he set on her desk without preamble. Evelyn looked at the folder, then at Marcus. That was fast. Military background made it faster. Once we had the movement pattern confirmed by 2 independent analysts, we ran the garage footage through enhanced processing, got a partial plate, cross-referenced with... He stopped. You don't need the methodology. I might need the methodology later, but not right now. She opened the folder. Mark Reynolds, 32. Former Navy SEAL. She paused on this, felt something click into place. 12 years of service. Medical separation listed as the official exit reason, which Marcus had flagged with a note. Likely voluntary, separation terms suggest mutual, no disciplinary record. Current residence, Portland, Oregon. She was already in Portland. Of course she was. Single father. 1 daughter, Emma, age 8. Wife deceased. She stopped here too. Felt the specific weight of that particular fact. The way certain information lands differently than you expect it to. Current occupation, private security consulting. No firm affiliation. Independent contractor. Clients mostly corporate. Clean record. No debt beyond a manageable mortgage on a house in a quiet neighborhood in Northeast Portland. She went through the rest of the files slowly. There were 2 photographs. One from a professional headshot attached to an expired contractor credentials document from several years back, formal and deliberately neutral, the way those photos always were. The second was a candid, clearly pulled from a school event of some kind, date stamped 14 months ago. He was standing at the edge of a group of parents in a school gymnasium, holding a paper plate with something on it, talking to a woman whose face was half out of frame. He was wearing the jacket with the functional zipper. He looked exactly like what he was, a man attending an ordinary event in an ordinary life, not performing it. She closed the folder. He went out of his way not to be found, she said. Yes. The cash, the name on the reservation. There's a name in here. James Park. Placeholder name, paid cash at the restaurant too. The prepaid phone number he used for the reservation was deactivated. Marcus's expression was neutral. This is not a man who maintains a casual relationship with privacy. No. She tapped the folder. What's your read? Marcus considered this, which meant he had a read and was deciding how to phrase it. He's not hiding from anything specific, Marcus said finally. No warrants, no creditors, no custody issues, nothing in his history that suggests he's running from a problem. It's more like, he paused again, he built a life designed to be left alone. That's different from hiding. Evelyn sat with that for a moment. The distinction mattered. It mattered in ways she was still working out. Has he had any contact with media? None. He's been completely silent. Given the footage spread, that's notable. Someone who wanted attention would have come forward by now. Someone who wanted money would have come forward by now, she said. Yes. He wants neither. She stood up, moved to the window. Her office was on the 22nd floor, higher than the apartment, the view more comprehensive and somehow less personal for it. I need an approach that doesn't make him feel ambushed. With respect, any approach is going to feel like an ambush to this man. You found him. That's already the thing that's happened. She knew he was right. Can we find where he usually gets coffee in the morning? A routine location? Marcus looked at her. I want to make contact in a public place. Casual. Not at his home, not a formal meeting, I don't want it to feel like I've sent a team. She turned from the window. Because I want to talk to him, not scare him off for good. I'll see what I can find. Marcus picked up the folder, tucked it under his arm. Miss Cross, this man took significant steps to remain anonymous after a public act. He may not want to be found. I know he doesn't want to be found. And you're going to find him anyway. She met his eyes. I owe him a conversation. At minimum. She paused. His daughter is 8, and there are 5 million people on the internet who are actively looking for him. He should know that, if he doesn't already. Marcus held her gaze for a moment, then nodded. Not agreement exactly, but the particular acknowledgement of a man who has said his piece and will now do his job. He left. Evelyn stood at the window and watched a plane descend in the distance, slow and deliberate, following its path toward a runway she couldn't see. She'd had this conversation with herself in various forms since Thursday morning. The self-interrogation of a woman who understood that her desire to find him was not purely practical. Part of it was obligation. Part of it was the specific quality of something unfinished. The breath she drew in that restaurant had tasted different from any she'd taken since, and she didn't have language for why, not yet. Part of it, if she was being fully honest in the way she rarely was in the daylight hours, was the fact that he had held her and walked away, and she could count on one hand the number of people in her adult life who had ever wanted anything from her that badly and then wanted nothing at all. She pressed her palm flat against the glass. Somewhere in northeast Portland, in a house with a mortgage and a daughter with a school book report, a man was constructing his life with careful, deliberate hands, and she was already in the process of interrupting it. She knew this. She went ahead anyway. 12. Marcus found the coffee shop on Sunday, a place called Common Ground on a residential street near Emma's school. Mark went there most weekday mornings, arrived between 7:15 and 7:30, ordered the same thing, sat at the counter by the window for 20 minutes, then left. He paid cash. He spoke to the barista, a young man named apparently Theo, with the easy shorthand of regular customers. Not overfamiliar, not cold, just the comfortable friction of a repeated small transaction that had accrued a little warmth. Evelyn went on Monday. She went alone, which Marcus had argued against and lost. She went in the clothes she wore on weekends when she wasn't in meetings: dark jeans, a sweater that was not designer in any visible way, hair down because having it up was a kind of armor, and she was trying consciously to arrive without armor. She sat at the counter 3 stools from where Marcus had told her Mark usually sat, ordered a coffee she didn't need on top of the 2 she'd already had, and waited. He came in at 7:22. She recognized him from the folder photographs, but photographs had not prepared her for the actual quality of his presence, which was difficult to describe and immediately apparent. He moved through the coffee shop door and the space did not change. He didn't command attention the way she had spent years learning to do. But something in the ambient environment organized slightly, the way a room organizes around a person who knows exactly where they're going. He nodded to Theo. He took the stool at the counter. He didn't look at his phone. She had 6 minutes, maybe 8, before he'd be done and gone. She had prepared several opening lines on the drive over and discarded all of them in the parking lot. She turned toward him and said, "You ordered the same thing I was going to order." It was not one of the prepared lines. It was just the first true thing that came out, which was not usually how she operated in professional or strategic contexts, and for a moment she wasn't sure what she'd done. He looked at her. His eyes were dark and they focused on her with the specific qualities she'd noticed in the restaurant. Not aggressive, not blank, just completely present. He looked at her the way someone looks when they are actually looking, not scanning or assessing or managing. He knew who she was. She could see the moment of recognition. Not surprise, not much of anything that showed. Just the recalibration of a person who has identified a thing and is now deciding what to do with it. "I've been coming here for 3 years," he said. "It's my order." "That's fair." She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. I know who you are." The directness was not aggressive. It was just factual, delivered the same way he'd said, "I've got you in the restaurant," stripped of performance, just the weight of the words. She'd been in enough conversations with people who wanted things from her to recognize the shape of someone who didn't. It altered the geometry of the whole thing. "Okay," she said. "Then you know why I'm here." "I have a theory." He looked at his coffee, then back at her. "How'd you find me?" "Security team, footage analysis, partial plates, cross-reference." She paused. "It took 2 days. You covered your tracks reasonably well. Apparently not well enough." The movement pattern was distinctive. She watched his expression, which didn't change much. "My head of security has a background in threat assessment. He said—" She stopped. "He said you move like someone trained." Mark said nothing. "I'm not here to make anything complicated," she said. I wanted to say thank you in person. That's the first reason. You could have sent a card. I could have. She looked at him. I didn't want to send a card. He turned his coffee cup on the counter, a small rotation, the fidget of a man who doesn't fidget much. The other reasons. There are 5 million people on the internet looking for you. That number is going to keep growing. I have a PR team who has been fielding press inquiries since Thursday, and they're going to keep fielding them, and at some point someone else is going to do what my team did. She kept her voice even, not apologetic, not manipulative, just honest. I wanted you to know that, if you don't already. Something moved through his expression. Not surprise. She had the impression this was not a man who was surprised by information, only by what it required of him. I figured as much, he said. Your daughter. He went still. Not tense. Still, the way something's still when its attention has fully arrived. What about my daughter? I'm not saying anything except that if your name becomes public, which it may, she'll be affected. Kids at school see things. Evelyn held his gaze. I have resources that can manage that, if you want them. Media suppression, legal measures, control of the narrative. I've done it for myself. I can do it for... I don't want your resources. I know you don't. She said it simply, without offense, without the performance of being unoffended. I'm offering them anyway because your daughter didn't choose to be in this, and neither did you, and I'm the reason you are. He looked at her for a long moment. Theo was doing something with the espresso machine at the other end of the counter, the ambient noise of milk steaming and metal, the small percussion of an ordinary morning. Why were you at that restaurant? He asked. It wasn't what she'd expected. She paused. It was a working dinner. Quarterly review with the board liaison team. You do quarterly reviews at Ardent. I do quarterly reviews wherever the table is reserved. A small shrug. It's usually somewhere like that. Does it bother you? She blinked. Does what bother me? That kind of life. He said it without judgment, just the plain curiosity of someone asking a genuine question. The restaurant, the team around you, all of it organized around what you need. It was not the question anyone asked her. People asked her about growth strategy and acquisition targets and industry disruption, and whether she found it difficult being a woman in her position, which was its own kind of presumption. Nobody asked whether the restaurant bothered her. Sometimes, she said, which was truer than she'd intended to be. He nodded, as if this confirmed something he already knew. My daughter thinks you're impressive, he said. She looked you up. Evelyn didn't know what to do with that, which was unusual. She laughed, slightly. Not a social laugh, but an actual one, the involuntary kind. How old did you say she was? 8? 8-year-olds don't usually have opinions about business executives. Emma has opinions about everything. He said it with the specific, helpless affection of a man who has been outthought by his child and has made his peace with it. She told me the engineering scholarships were impressive. A pause. I think she was making an argument. Was she? He looked at his coffee again. She usually is. The door to the coffee shop opened and 2 women came in, talking loudly about something that had happened to one of them over the weekend, and the spell of the conversation shifted slightly, the world coming back in. Mark checked his watch. He was going to leave soon. Evelyn could feel it. I don't want anything from you, she said, before he could stand up. I want to be clear about that. I'm not here because I want to hire you or involve you in my business or put your story in front of a camera. I know that's probably what you assume. It crossed my mind, he said. I want to say thank you, and I want to make sure that what I caused, the exposure, the footage, doesn't hurt your daughter. That's it. She put her coffee down. Those are the things I want. If you tell me to leave you alone, I'll leave you alone. He looked at her for a moment. That was longer than comfortable and shorter than his usual stillness. She was beginning to map his rhythms, the specific texture of how he processed things, which was deliberate in a way that most people weren't. The media attention, he said. You said you can manage it. Yes. How? Legal pressure. The footage that's circulating. Most of it was uploaded without the original poster's understanding of the legal exposure they have. We can send takedown demands with enough teeth that compliance is likely. The restaurant's security footage we can move to suppress with a privacy argument that will hold. The phone footage. She turned her cup, a gesture she recognized as borrowed from him, is harder. But we can shift the narrative away from identification. Make the story about the incident rather than the person. He was quiet for a moment. That's a lot of legal infrastructure to deploy over dinner. It's not over dinner. It's over the fact that your privacy has been compromised in a way that's my fault. It's not your fault you choked. It's my fault the footage spread. She held his gaze. My team was there. One of my team, the man across from me, had his phone out. I don't know for certain, I haven't confirmed which clip came from whom, but the first post went up within an hour from an account I can trace to someone adjacent to my team. She kept her voice flat. I'm dealing with that internally, but the chain of events leads back to me. Something shifted in his expression. Not warmth, exactly, but the slight softening of a man who has been given an honest thing and recognized it. How long would it take? He said. The takedowns? 48 hours to initiate. Most will comply within a week. The search results take longer to change. A month? Maybe. She paused. But it needs to happen soon. The longer the footage is indexed, the harder the cache is to clear. He looked at the door, then back at her. I'll need to think about it. That's fair. I don't want Emma involved in any part of this. She won't be. I mean, she won't know your team is operating anywhere near her life. Understood. He stood up, which was the thing she'd been expecting and bracing for, and looked at her from that slightly different angle, standing while she sat, which altered nothing about the balance of the conversation in the way that height differentials sometimes did, because it wasn't about height. It was about whatever he had in the center of himself that was entirely his own. The coffee shop, he said. I'd prefer if this wasn't where we met going forward. He paused. If there's a going forward, there doesn't have to be. She meant it. But if there is, she nodded. I'll have my assistant reach out with a contact number, neutral location, your choice, your timing. She stood too. It felt wrong to stay seated. For what it's worth, Mr. Reynolds, the 3 seconds between when you stood up and when you reached me, I was aware of you before I was aware of anything else in that room. I don't know why I noticed you first. She paused. I don't usually notice people I haven't been briefed on. He looked at her steadily. You were in a crisis. The brain notices useful things. Maybe. She picked up her jacket from the stool. Or maybe you're harder to miss than you think you are. He didn't answer that. She hadn't expected him to. She put enough cash on the counter for both their coffees and walked out before he could object, into the damp October morning with the smell of rain on concrete and the particular feeling of a conversation that had ended at the right moment and left everything still open. Behind her in the coffee shop, she heard Theo say something and Mark respond. The short, easy shorthand of men who have exchanged the same words enough times that the words no longer matter much. Only the habit of exchange. Normal. Ordinary. The texture of a life that had been assembled carefully and would not appreciate being disrupted. She walked to her car and sat in it for a moment before starting it. Her throat was still a little sore. She pressed 2 fingers against it, lightly, and thought about a voice saying, I've got you in a room where everything had narrowed down to the simple question of the next breath. She started the car. There was a board meeting at 9. There was a call with the Singapore office at 11. There was the internal matter of whoever on her team had posted the footage, which needed to be addressed directly and would be unpleasant and necessary. There were 17 items on her calendar between now and 6 o'clock. She pulled out of the parking lot. She was thinking about the way he'd said, Emma has opinions about everything, with that particular quality in his voice. The specific, helpless, absolute love of a parent who has made a child the center of everything and doesn't regret it, not for a single second, even on the hard days, even when it costs everything else. The morning was gray and ordinary, and she drove through it toward the day's requirements. And for reasons she wasn't going to examine closely in a parking lot at 7:30 on a Monday, she was almost looking forward to whatever happened next. He thought about it for 2 days. That was longer than he usually took with decisions, which generally resolved themselves quickly, not impulsively, but with the clean efficiency of someone who had learned to distinguish between decisions that required deliberation and decisions that only felt like they did. Most things that presented themselves as complex were actually simple once you stripped away the noise of preference and ego and fear. The question was usually not what should I do, but what am I willing to do? And those were different questions with different answers. This one was genuinely complex. He walked Emma to school on Tuesday morning and stood at the corner where he always stopped. She had established this boundary herself at age 7. The precise point at which parental accompaniment became visible from the school entrance and therefore subject to interpretation by her peers, a negotiation he had accepted without argument, and watched her go the rest of the way with her backpack and her uneven haircut and the particular walk she had, slightly too purposeful for 8, like someone who had somewhere important to be and was going there. He stood there until she was through the door. Then he took the long route home. He did this sometimes when something needed working out, not the direct route, the long one. Through the neighborhood where the houses got slightly larger and the trees were older, where people walked dogs at this hour, and the sound of the city was a low background hum rather than a foreground presence. He walked and let the problem sit in the middle of his attention without pushing it. The problem was not, actually, Evelyn Cross. The problem was that she was right, and he'd known she was right before she'd finished her second sentence in the coffee shop, and acknowledging that meant accepting something he'd been specifically constructed his life to avoid, that his choices had consequences that extended beyond himself and Emma, and that those consequences sometimes required engagement with the world he'd stepped back from. The footage was not going away on its own. He'd been monitoring it with the particular dread of a man watching a slow flood, not fast enough to demand immediate action, fast enough to ensure that inaction was also a choice. Accounts dedicated to identifying him had appeared on 2 platforms. One had 19,000 followers. Someone had already gotten the restaurant name from the background details and was cross-referencing Portland residents with Navy SEAL backgrounds. It was incomplete and incorrect so far. The name attached to the most popular theory was a man who had been stationed at a base in Bremerton 12 years ago and bore a superficial physical resemblance. But incorrect was not the same as permanently misdirected, and Emma would be at that school for 2 more years. He walked the long route and came home and stood in the kitchen and called the number that had appeared in his messages the previous morning, sent from an unknown contact labeled only EC Assistant. A woman answered on the second ring, professional and measured. Mr. Reynolds, Ms. Cross asked me to let her know when you called. She'd like to know if you're available to meet today. He had a security assessment in the afternoon, a corporate client in the Pearl District, a routine walkthrough that would take 2 hours. He was free until 1. This morning, he said, her choice of location. She chose a conference room, not in the Cross Technologies Tower downtown. He'd half expected that. The home field advantage move, the subtle architecture of power that operated through environment. Instead, it was a small room in a co-working space on the east side, the kind of place that rented space by the hour to people who needed a table and a door and no particular statement. The table was ordinary. The chairs were ordinary. The coffee on the table when he arrived was from a chain, not from someone's assistant who knew the exact specifications of how she drank it. She was already there when he came in, which he noted. She'd arrived first, which was either a courtesy or a strategy, and he decided it was probably both. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I said I'd think about it." He sat down. "I thought about it." "And?" "You can proceed with the takedowns, the legal suppression." He kept his voice even. "With conditions?" She folded her hands on the table. She wasn't performing patience, he noted. She was actually patient, or doing an extremely good impression of it, which amounted to the same thing practically. "Tell me the conditions." "Emma's name doesn't appear in anything your team touches. Not as a subject of inquiry, not in any legal document, not in any internal communication that could be subpoenaed later. She doesn't exist in this context." "Agreed. Your team doesn't surveil me, doesn't track my location, my schedule, my clients. What happened at the coffee shop?" He paused. "That's a one-time thing. It doesn't become a model." She held his gaze. "That's fair. I want to know the name of the person who posted the original footage. I'm not going to do anything with it. I want to know." She was quiet for a moment, not hesitation, consideration. "His name is Drew Kavanaugh. He was the junior liaison on my board team. He's no longer employed by Cross Technologies as of last Friday." She paused. He didn't understand what he was doing. He thought it was a good story. He was 24 and he made a bad call. Another pause. "I told him that directly before I let him go." Mark said nothing for a moment. Then, "How'd he take it?" "Badly, at first. Then he said he was sorry. She looked at her hands. I believed him. Okay. He moved on. The legal operation, I want a summary of every action taken. Not in real time, but weekly. I don't want surprises. I can do that. She tilted her head slightly. Is that everything? Almost. He looked at her directly. Why does this matter to you? Past obligation. She didn't look away. He'd expected a professional answer, the managed version of why, the one that sounded right and gave nothing. Instead, she was quiet for long enough that he understood she was deciding how much truth to bring to it. I've spent 10 years building a life where everything is managed, she said finally. My calendar, my image, my environment. I have people around me whose entire job is to make sure that nothing in my life is uncontrolled. She paused. And then I was in a restaurant and I was dying, and the person who helped me was someone nobody had briefed me on. And he didn't want anything, and he left before I could even look at him directly. She held his gaze. That's never happened to me. I don't mean the choking, I mean the other part. Mark was quiet. I'm not saying it means something it doesn't mean, she said. And there was a sharpness in it. Preemptive, the correction of a woman who had been in enough situations where people projected meaning onto her actions. I'm saying that a thing happened that I don't know what to do with, and I generally know what to do with things, and that's uncomfortable. You came to the coffee shop to get comfortable again, he said. She blinked. It was the first time he'd seen her genuinely caught off guard. She started. That's probably partly true. Most people do. When something uncontrolled happens, they go find the source of it and contain it. It makes sense. Is that what I'm doing? Containing you? I don't know yet. He said it honestly. I think you believe you're trying to help. I think you might also be here because the not knowing was bothering you. Both can be true. She looked at him for a long moment. Outside the conference room, the co-working space made its ordinary sounds. Keyboards, a phone, someone's conversation bleeding faintly through a wall. You're direct, she said. You seem like you can handle it. I can. She almost smiled, and then didn't, and the almost was more interesting than the completion would have been. Most people aren't, with me. I noticed. She picked up her coffee. I want to propose something, and I want you to hear it before you answer because the first instinct is going to be no. He said nothing. Waited. Cross Technologies runs safety and emergency response programs for our partner companies. Corporate training, workplace incident prevention. It's not a large part of what we do. It was something my father started and I've maintained because the data on workplace accident prevention is genuinely compelling. She turned the cup on the table. The programs are staffed by external contractors, mostly former first responders. The curriculum has gaps in it, specifically in the area of what we call active crisis response, the immediate intervention window before emergency services arrive. She met his eyes. What you did in the restaurant, that exact competency. He was quiet. I'm not offering you a job, she said quickly before he could recalibrate. I'm suggesting a consulting arrangement, temporary. You assess the gaps in our existing curriculum and recommend a module. That's it. You don't work for me. You don't come into the building. You don't have a badge or a title or a desk. She paused. It would also give me a professional reason for having been in contact with you, if that ever needs explaining publicly, which is useful for both of us. The room was quiet for a moment. He turned this over, said, not the surface of it, the underside. He was looking for this angle, the thing that wasn't being said. Not because he believed she was dishonest exactly, but because he'd spent too many years in environments where proposals came with layers to stop looking for the layers automatically. He didn't find one. That was either genuinely clean or a very sophisticated clean, and he couldn't tell which yet. The scope, he said. What does assess and recommend actually mean in practice? 3 to 5 meetings. Review the existing materials, identify what's missing, write a one-page proposal for a new module. You hand it to my VP of operations, you're done. She paused. Maybe 8 hours of work total. And the rate. Whatever you normally charge for consulting, plus 30%. I normally charge $400 an hour. She didn't blink. Then $520. He sat back slightly. He wasn't sure he'd said that to see if she'd flinch. Maybe he had. I don't need the plus 30%. I know you don't. It's not for need, it's for inconvenience. She held his gaze. You've been inconvenienced. That's worth something. He thought about Emma, about the book report she'd finished. Barely, at 10 o'clock on Thursday night, reading him the closing paragraph with the expression of someone who knew it was not their best work, but was done. About the teacher who had asked about fancy restaurants. About the account with 19,000 followers reconstructing the background details of the ardent footage. He thought about what it would mean to accept this. Not just the logistics of it. The logistics were manageable. What it would mean in the deeper sense. That the careful separation between the life he'd built and the life he'd left had been breached, and that he was now choosing to open that breach slightly wider rather than trying to close it. The daughter thing, he said. If anything you do operationally comes within 10 feet of her school, her teachers, her friends, anyone she knows, this stops immediately. No conversation, no explanation. It stops. Understood. And I'm going to need to verify the takedowns are happening, not a summary, a log, timestamps, platforms, response rates. I'll have Marcus set it up. I'll need to look at your existing safety curriculum before I agree to the consulting piece. I'm not signing on to something I haven't read. I'll have it sent to you today. He looked at her. She looked back. The particular quality of her attention he'd noticed was different from most people's. It didn't scan, didn't drift, didn't carry the ambient distraction of someone managing multiple things at once. When she was focused on you, she was entirely focused on you, which was not always a comfortable thing to receive, but was at minimum honest. "Why did you go into the engineering scholarships?" he said. It was not what he'd planned to say. She looked faintly surprised. "That's a left turn." "Your daughter mentioned them," Emma's voice in his head. The engineering scholarships were impressive. "I'm curious." "My mother was an engineer," Evelyn said, and the simplicity of it told him immediately that this was true in the unmanaged way, not the talking point way. She was excellent at it. She left the field when I was 7 because the environment was, she didn't put it this way, she put it much more diplomatically. It was hostile to her being exactly who she was. A pause. She never went back. She did other things, good things, but I always thought about what she might have built if the conditions had been different. So you make the conditions different. I try to. She paused. It's not entirely selfless. The data on gender-diverse engineering teams is very good. I'm also doing it because it's profitable. She met his eyes. I'm not a saint. I wasn't suggesting you were. Most people, when they hear the scholarship story, assume I'm performing altruism. It makes them more comfortable than the idea that it's both genuine and good business. She turned her cup again. You didn't assume that. People are usually both things at once, he said. It's not complicated. She looked at him for a moment with an expression he couldn't fully read. Not guarded, not open, something in between, the expression of a person recalibrating slightly. The curriculum, she said, returning to it. I'll have it to you by end of day. How do I reach you? He wrote a phone number on the notepad in the center of the table and pushed it toward her. Not the main line, a secondary number he used for contract clients, routed through an app, no personal information attached. She looked at it. Not the prepaid. No, but close. She almost smiled again. This time she let it land, briefly, and it changed her face in a way he filed and did not examine too closely. They both stood up. He was closer to the door, but she reached it at the same time, and there was a moment, brief, functional, the minor awkwardness of two people arriving at an exit simultaneously, where they were standing less than 2 feet apart, and he was aware of how different they were, in all the immediately visible ways. The specific weight of money on a person, not performative but structural, in the quality of everything she wore and held and inhabited. The specific weight of the other kind of life on him, the kind that left marks of a different sort. She was also, he noticed, still slightly off. Some physiological residue of the restaurant, the way the body holds recent emergencies longer than the mind does. She was standing straight, holding herself fully together, but there was a carefulness to her breathing that hadn't been there before Wednesday. Does your throat still bother you? He said. She paused. A little. The doctor said that's normal. Irritation from the blockage. It'll be gone in another few days. He paused. You should be drinking more water than you think you need. She looked at him. How do you know that? Field medicine. He held the door. You probably got the same advice from your doctor. I did. A pause. I keep forgetting. People do. He stepped back, not quite out the door, the particular stillness that was his version of not quite done. The curriculum. End of day is fine. End of day, she confirmed. He left. The curriculum arrived at 4:17 and was, as he'd half expected, competent and insufficient in equal measure. He read it at the kitchen table while Emma did homework at the other end, the two of them in the specific companionable quiet they'd developed over years, each in their own work but present to each other in the peripheral way that was better, in its own way, than active conversation. Emma had music playing on her tablet at low volume. She always worked to music, another trait that was entirely hers, impossible to attribute to either parent. The curriculum was built on solid first responder principles, but had a gap he identified on the second read-through. It addressed what to do after emergency services were notified, which was to say it addressed the 10-minute window after the critical moment. What it did not address was the 0 to 90-second window before, which was exactly the window that determined whether the 10-minute window was ever relevant. This was not an unusual gap. Most corporate safety training had it because 0 to 90-second training required a different kind of methodology, faster, more physical, less easily delivered via slideshow. He made notes in the margins of the printed pages. He'd printed them, he still printed things he was reading seriously. And the notes were specific and technical and organized themselves, as he was writing, into the rough shape of a module. You're doing work stuff, Emma observed, not looking up from her own papers. Yes. The fancy woman's work stuff? Her company's safety training materials. Emma was quiet for a moment. So you said yes. I said conditionally yes. What are the conditions? You stay out of it entirely. She looked up at him with the expression that was about three things at once. I was already out of it. I know. I'm making it official. That's not really how conditions work, Dad. A condition is something that could be different. Me being out of it was never going to be different. She looked back at her work. Unless you were worried I was going to do something. You researched things on library computers. That was one time. A pause. Twice. He looked back at the curriculum. She looked back at her homework. The music on her tablet was something instrumental, something with piano that he didn't recognize, and it moved through the kitchen like water moves through a familiar space, filling the shape of it without disturbing anything. She sounds serious, Emma said after a while. She is. Does she have people who care about her? Like outside of work people? He thought about the apartment she'd described without describing, the space designed for entertaining, permanently empty of people. The team around her at the restaurant that was staff, not friends, the managed quality of everything in her life. I think that's complicated, he said. Emma nodded slowly, like this was an answer that confirmed something. People who are used to doing everything themselves sometimes forget how to let other people help, she said, with the specific authority of a child who has read this exact dynamic in approximately 40 novels. That's very perceptive. I read a lot. I know you do. She finished a math problem and moved on to the next one. Is she going to be okay, like after the restaurant thing? Physically, yes. She was shaken up. She'll get there. What about not physically? He was quiet for a moment, thinking about a woman pressing her palm flat against a conference room table and saying, I generally know what to do with things. That's between her and herself. Emma accepted this. They worked in their respective silences for another 20 minutes. And then Emma closed her notebook and said the homework was done. And he said, good. And she asked what was for dinner. And he said, pasta. And she said, can we have the one with the breadcrumbs on top? And he said, yes. And the evening moved forward in its ordinary way. The shape of a life that was small by design and large by the only measurements that mattered. The trouble started 11 days after the coffee shop. He'd been prepared for something. The calculation was never that everything would resolve cleanly, only that the acute phase would pass and things would stabilize into something manageable. The takedowns were proceeding. Marcus Webb had been sending the logs as agreed. Timestamps, platforms, response rates, exactly what he'd asked for, nothing extra. The original footage was substantially off major platforms. The identification-focused accounts had stalled out on the wrong name. He had begun to believe, provisionally, that the worst was over. Then someone got the school. He didn't know exactly how. The chain of inference, assembled later, suggested a comment thread on a local Portland forum where someone who lived in his neighborhood had made a connection between the partial physical description in the circulating articles and a man they'd seen at a school event. The comment had been vague enough to be deniable and specific enough to be actionable, and someone with more time than sense had acted on it. He found out because the school called. It was the vice principal, Ms. Tran, a woman he respected, careful, competent, not given to panic. She called at 2:15, 30 minutes before dismissal, and her voice had the particular controlled quality of a person managing something they didn't want to alarm him about but couldn't not call about. Mr. Reynolds, we've had 2 people come by today asking questions about student families. They didn't identify themselves as press. One said she was a parent. The other said he was doing a neighborhood survey. A pause. Neither of them had children at the school. We identified that before they got past the front office. He was already on his feet. Emma's fine. She's in class. She doesn't know about this. I wanted to call you before dismissal. I'm on my way. Mr. Reynolds. They weren't threatening. I want to be clear about that. But they were asking specifically about, I'll be there in 15 minutes. He hung up and was in the car in 4 minutes and at the school in 12, which was 3 minutes faster than was strictly reasonable, but the streets had cooperated. He sat in the pickup line with the engine running and his hands on the wheel and did the thing he'd learned to do in the field when adrenaline was functionally useless. Breathe through it, identify what was actually required, ignore everything else. What was actually required? Emma picked up, safe, no contact with anyone she didn't know. Then a conversation with Marcus Webb. Then a conversation with Evelyn Cross. He called Evelyn from the pickup line. She picked up on the second ring. Mark. She'd started using his first name sometime in the last 2 weeks, he'd noted, in the way that shifts in address noted themselves, a small thing that was larger in the aggregate. Someone went to Emma's school today, he said, twice. Different people, same general inquiry, about student families. A pause that was shorter than it should have been if this was news. I know. Marcus flagged it an hour ago. We were tracking the forum thread where the school connection came from. I was about to call you. You were tracking it and you were about to call me. He kept his voice flat. It was an effort. It escalated faster than Evelyn. He said her name the way he said the things that mattered. Level, direct, with enough weight behind it that the word was doing its actual job. We had an agreement about anything that came near Emma. I know, I'm sorry. We thought we had more time before it. More time isn't the same as telling me. He stopped himself. The pickup line was moving. He could see the school doors. I'm picking her up now. After that, I need you to have Marcus tell me exactly what they know about where this thread is. Names, platforms, how far it's spread. I'll have it for you within the hour. And I need whatever you can do legally done tonight, not this week, tonight. I'm already on it. She paused. The 2 people who went to the school, my team ID'd them. One is a freelance journalist who's been following the story from the beginning. The other is a man who runs one of the identification accounts. Neither of them has enough yet to go to print or to post, but they're close. The line moved again, and the school doors opened, and Emma came out in the middle of a stream of kids, backpack on, head down, reading something she'd apparently taken out of her bag before she was through the door. She looked up when she reached the car and got in and said, "You're early." "Finished work early." She looked at him with the look. "You're making the face." "I'm not making a face." The face where everything is fine, but actually something happened. She buckled her seatbelt. "Is it the Evelyn Cross thing?" "We'll talk about it at home." "Dad, at home, Em." She turned and looked out the window. He pulled out of the school lot and back into traffic, and she was quiet in the way she was quiet when she was worried. Not the companionable quiet, the taut kind, the kind where she was running her own calculations. He drove. On the phone in his jacket pocket, Evelyn was presumably already moving, calling Marcus, escalating the legal action, doing the things she did with the same efficiency she brought to everything in her life. He'd watched it from a professional distance over the last 2 weeks, the way she operated, the speed of it, the precision. She was not the kind of person who sat with a problem longer than necessary. She identified it, assessed it, moved. He pulled into the driveway. Emma was out of the car before he'd fully stopped through the front door, dropping her bag in the hall with the specific energy of someone who is pretending to be normal and not quite pulling it off. He followed her inside. She was in the kitchen, standing at the counter, not getting anything from the counter, just standing there with her hands on the edge of it. When he came in, she turned around. "Tell me," she said. She was 8. She said it like someone who had been waiting a long time. He sat down at the table. She sat down across from him, which she did when she was treating something like a real conversation. He told her. The school, the people, the forum thread. Not everything, not to the full operational detail, but enough. She had always received enough better than she received either too much or too little. She listened. She didn't interrupt. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, looking at her hands on the table. "Are they going to find out your name?" she asked. "They might. We're working on preventing that, but I can't promise you it won't happen." She nodded slowly. "And if it does?" "We manage it. It becomes a different kind of problem, but it's still a manageable problem." "Do I have to change schools?" I don't think so. I don't want that." He paused. "It's the last resort." She thought about this. "What's the first resort?" "Making sure the information never becomes public. That's what's happening right now. And Evelyn Cross is helping with that." "Her team, yes." Emma looked at her hands. She picked at the edge of her thumbnail with her index finger, a habit she had when she was working through something real. "I don't think she's bad," Emma said. "I know this is her fault in a way, but I don't think she's bad." "Nobody said she was bad." "You got the voice." Emma looked up. "The voice you get when something's going wrong and someone is responsible." "Something did go wrong, but she's trying to fix it." Emma held his gaze with the steady patience she'd had since she was 2 years old, the particular steadiness of someone who had grown up with one parent and had therefore developed early a fine sensitivity to that parent's emotional weather. "Are you going to get mad at her?" He looked at his daughter. He thought about what mad actually meant in this context, whether what he was feeling was anger at Evelyn Cross, or anger at the situation, or just the ambient terror of a parent who had nearly walked into a school to find something wrong with his child, the body's residual system still processing the threat it had expected and hadn't found. "I'm going to talk to her," he said, calmly. Emma nodded. "Okay." She stood up, apparently satisfied with this, and retrieved her backpack from the hall. At the kitchen doorway, she stopped. "Dad? She came to your coffee shop to say thank you, and she couldn't even do that right because you were already gone." She paused. "She tracked you down and found you in a city and got you to agree to help her fix things. That's not nothing." She shifted her backpack strap. "She's trying." He looked at his daughter, this 8-year-old person who had arrived in his life and rearranged all of his understanding of what mattered and why, and felt the particular feeling he got sometimes when she said something that landed squarely in the place where truth lived. "Go do your homework," he said. "It's done. Then go read." She went upstairs. He sat at the kitchen table and his phone lit up with Marcus Webb's number and the log of everything his team had identified in the last 3 hours. Names, platforms, the specific contours of how close this had gotten. He read through it. Then he called Evelyn back. She picked up on the first ring this time. "I have everything ready," she said, before he could start. "Marcus is initiating the legal action tonight. Cease and desist to the journalist and the account operator. The forum thread. We're going to the platform directly with a privacy violation argument that will hold. And I'm flying in a legal team from our DC office tomorrow who specialize in this." "That's a lot of resources." "Yes." A pause. "I underestimated the speed. I should have called you earlier. That's on me." She said it the way she said things that were on her, directly, without performance of contrition, just the clean acknowledgement of a thing that was true and shouldn't be argued with. "I'm sorry." He was quiet for a moment. "Is Emma all right?" she asked. "She's upstairs reading." He paused. "She thinks you're trying." A longer pause this time. I'm glad she thinks that. Her voice had changed slightly, the managed quality of it shifting towards something less calibrated. Is she scared? Emma doesn't scare easy. She's worried. He looked at the table. She's 8. She shouldn't be worried about this. I know. Evelyn's voice was quiet. I know she shouldn't. He heard her breathing on the other end of the line, careful and measured, like she was still counting something. The DC team, he said. What can they actually do? Enough. She was steadier when she was operational, he'd noticed. Problems brought her into focus the way action had always brought him into focus. Give me 72 hours, and I can make this very uncomfortable for anyone who publishes your name. Not impossible, but uncomfortable enough that the freelancer does the math and decides it's not worth the legal exposure. And if it's not enough, then we have a different conversation. A pause. But it'll be enough. He thought about the woman in the restaurant, bent over the table, both hands flat, drawing that enormous breath. He thought about Emma saying she's trying, with the particular authority of someone who had assessed this from the outside and arrived at a conclusion. 72 hours, he said. Yes. I'll hold you to that. I know you will. Another pause, and then quieter. He would have been fine, you know, at the restaurant. You could have not moved, and I'd have been... Someone would have eventually... She stopped. I moved, he said simply. That's done. I know. She stopped again, and he understood that she was trying to say something about the weight of it, about what it meant to owe someone a thing they refused to accept as a debt. He understood this better than she probably assumed. Evelyn. He used her name the way he used words when they needed to carry something. Fix the problem in front of us, that's all. She was quiet for a moment. Okay, she said, and it was the cleanest thing he'd heard her say since the coffee shop. Not performing certainty, not managing her own image. Just 2 syllables that meant I hear you and I will. He hung up. Outside, the October dark had settled over the neighborhood, and the maple in the yard was dropping its gold into the dark like something it had decided to let go of. He sat at the table for a while, in the particular quiet of a house where a child is upstairs and safe and reading, the best quiet there is, and waited for the 72 hours to begin. The 72 hours passed the way the difficult ones always do. Not quickly, not slowly, but with the particular texture of time that is being actively monitored. Mark checked the log Marcus sent every morning. Platforms were complying. The journalist had gone quiet after the cease and desist landed with what Evelyn's DC legal team had apparently described, in their cover letter, as considerable enthusiasm for litigation. The account operator, a 26-year-old in Boca Raton who ran 3 identification communities as a hobby, had taken the account private within 6 hours of receiving the legal notice, then deleted it entirely by morning. The forum thread had been removed. The cache was being addressed. The search results were shifting. On the 3rd morning, Mark read through the log, set it on the kitchen table, and made Emma's lunch without thinking about it. The particular autopilot of a man whose hands know a routine so well they don't require supervision. Peanut butter, no jelly. Emma had rejected jelly at age 5 on the grounds that it made the bread wet, and this had not changed. Apple slices. The small bag of pretzels she rationed herself through the school day with a discipline he found privately impressive. Emma came downstairs, read his expression the way she always read his expression, and said, "It's better." "It's better," he confirmed. She sat down and ate her cereal and looked out the window at the yard where the maple had finished its October performance and was now bare and structural against the gray sky, and said nothing else about it. She'd been doing this for 3 days, not pressing, not asking for updates, giving him the room he needed to manage it, which was a generosity he recognized and tried not to take for granted. He drove her to school. He stopped at the corner. She walked the rest of the way without looking back, which she never did, and he watched her until she was through the door. Then he called Evelyn. "I saw the log," he said when she picked up. The Boca Raton deletion was unexpected. I thought he'd fight it. A pause. He could hear something in the background of her end, the ambient texture of an office in the morning. Sometimes people fold faster than the legal muscle actually requires. The journalist. "She's still out there. She's not going away. She's just paused." Evelyn's voice was measured. The cease and desist doesn't eliminate her story. It makes her more careful about what she publishes and when. She'll wait for a better angle. Meaning, if my name surfaces somewhere else, she'll move. Yes, so the goal is making sure it doesn't surface somewhere else. She paused. Which is a long-term project, not a 72-hour project. I want to be honest with you about that. He was quiet for a moment. The street was doing its ordinary weekday morning thing. 2 joggers, a man walking a dog that was deeply invested in a particular patch of grass, the slow progression of traffic toward the arterial. I know, he said. There's something else I want to bring to you. Not today, but soon. She paused. The consulting piece. The curriculum. I read it. I know you read it. Your notes arrived. He had sent them 3 days ago. The annotated pages scanned and forwarded through her assistant's contact. 8 pages of margin notes, technically specific, organized with the particular clarity of someone who had spent years writing operational assessments. And? My VP of Operations wants to know if you'll come in. Not to sign anything, not to commit to anything. Just to talk through the gap you identified in the 0 to 90-second window. She paused. She found your notes, I'm quoting her, genuinely alarming in the best possible way. What does that mean? It means she hadn't understood how significant the gap was until she read them, and now she does, and she wants to talk to the person who identified it. Another pause. Her name is Patricia Howe. She's been with the company 11 years. She's direct, and she doesn't waste time, and she'll respect yours. He thought about the curriculum. He thought about it more than he'd planned to, in the margins of the other thinking, the way genuinely interesting problems had a way of occupying space even when you hadn't invited them. The gap he'd identified was real, and the consequences of it were real. He'd seen what happened in the 0 to 90-second window when people didn't know what to do, and not just in the restaurant. He'd seen it in the field. He'd seen it in the way human beings froze in front of emergencies that were survivable, the horrible gap between what a person could do and what they actually did when the moment arrived. One meeting, he said. No commitment beyond the meeting. That's all I'm asking. At the co-working space, not the tower. I'll set it up. He got off the call and went home and spent the morning on the corporate security assessment that was his actual current work. A risk review for a mid-sized logistics company whose CEO had recently received a credible threat assessment and wanted someone to walk through their building protocols. It was ordinary work. It paid ordinarily. He did it with the same attention he brought to everything because the alternative to full attention was always a gap somewhere, and gaps had consequences. In the afternoon, he took a longer walk than usual and ended up, without fully planning it, at the river. He stood on the walkway above the Willamette and watched the water move, which it did regardless of everything else, which was the thing about rivers that had always made a certain amount of sense to him. You could stand here while your life rearranged itself around you, and the river was just moving, doing exactly what it did, indifferent and constant and somehow comforting in its indifference. He thought about Caroline. He didn't do this often, not deliberately. She appeared in his thinking the way she appeared in Emma's face sometimes, suddenly and specifically, the particular angle of a jaw or the way a certain kind of patience settled into a person's expression. He thought about what she would have said about all of this. She had been, among other things, a person of ruthless practicality, who had loved him without illusions and made decisions without sentimentality, and occasionally told him things that were uncomfortable and necessary with the same tone she used for everything, which was, "Here is a true thing. Do with it what you will." She would have said, "You're already in it," not as criticism, just as assessment. He stood at the river and accepted this. The meeting with Patricia Howe happened on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after the restaurant, in the same co-working space conference room where he and Evelyn had met. Evelyn was not there. He'd confirmed this in advance, not because he didn't want her there, but because the boundary mattered, the distinction between a conversation about work and a conversation about everything else. Patricia Howe was 53, compact, with the particular energy of someone who processed information faster than most people produced it, and had developed a manner of patience that was genuine but conditional. She would wait for you to get there, but she was going to notice how long it took. She had the annotated curriculum pages in front of her, and had apparently done her own annotations in a different color on top of his. "Talk me through this," she said, pointing to his note on page 7. "You wrote, The recognition window is not where programs fail. The action window is. Explain that. He settled in. Most training programs spend the majority of their time on recognition, how to identify an emergency, how to confirm it's real, how to assess severity. That's not nothing, but it's also not where people die. People die in the gap between recognize the problem and done something about it. He paused. The research on bystander response shows that recognition is actually fast, faster than most people assume. The hesitation is downstream of recognition. It's the action window. The social pressure problem. Partly. It's also training. Most people have never been told in a concrete physical way what to do with their hands in the 0 to 90-second window. They know the concept of the Heimlich maneuver. They've seen it on a poster, but they've never done it. So when the moment arrives, the concept stays a concept. He paused. And concepts don't save people. Patricia was writing. Your note on page 12, the module structure. You suggested a physical practice component. That's not how we deliver training currently. It's almost entirely didactic. Then the current training has a ceiling, he said simply, not a criticism of the people who built it. Didactic training is efficient and scalable. But for 0 to 90-second response, you need muscle memory, not recall. Those require different methods. She looked at him. This would require a significant redesign. The existing structure can stay. You'd add a practice component to the final session of each module. 2 hours, small groups, hands-on. He paused. It's not expensive. It's just different. Different is expensive in its own way. She tapped her pen on the papers. Who would run it? We outsource delivery to third-party trainers. You'd need to credential the trainers in the new component. I can write a credentialing standard. He said it before he'd entirely decided to, and then found he meant it. It's not complicated. It's specific. Patricia looked at him for a moment with the expression of someone who has been in enough meetings to recognize when a person is genuinely useful versus when a person is performing usefulness. Ms. Cross said you were direct, she said. She said the same about you. A short pause. Then Patricia smiled. Quick, genuine, gone. Fair. She stacked the papers. The scope you're describing is larger than what was originally proposed. I want to be accurate about that. We're not talking about a one-page recommendation anymore. No. What are you talking about? He considered. A curriculum addendum, the new module structure, the practice component, the credentialing standard, maybe 30 pages. 6 to 8 weeks of work on my end, not full-time. He paused. After that, it's your problem. After that, it's my very well-documented and clearly structured problem, Patricia said, which is what I actually need. She extended a hand across the table. I'll have a contract drafted. Same rate Ms. Cross mentioned, I'm assuming? Yes? Good. She gathered her papers. You'll hear from legal by end of week. She paused at the door. Mr. Reynolds, the restaurant. Half my team heard about it before we identified that it was connected to our company. A pause. What you did was... It was good. That's the only word for it. She looked slightly uncomfortable saying it, which made it more honest. That's all. He nodded. She left. He sat in the conference room for a moment alone with the particular feeling of a thing that had started in one place and arrived somewhere else entirely. The way rivers move. Not straight, not obvious, but arriving. The first time Emma met Evelyn was an accident. Mark had been clear. Not aggressively, not with the weight of a rule that needed enforcement, but clear in the specific way he was clear about things that mattered. That Emma's world and this situation were separate. Emma had accepted this with the equanimity she accepted most things, which meant she had accepted the letter of it and was quietly philosophical about the spirit. It was a Saturday afternoon in mid-November, 5 weeks after the restaurant. Mark had a follow-up meeting with Patricia Howe about the contract terms, a short meeting, 90 minutes at most, at the co-working space. He had brought Emma because the alternative was leaving her with Mrs. Galvez next door, who was perfectly fine but watched the kind of television Emma found aggressively unintelligent. Her words, age 7.5. You stay in the common area, he told Emma on the drive over. There's a couch and a coffee table and there are books, I've been told. What if the books are bad? Then you look at your phone for 90 minutes. My battery's at 12%. Emma, I'm just reporting a fact. You can sit and think. She gave him the look. For 90 minutes. People used to do it all the time. She looked back out the window with the expression of someone being deeply unreasonable and knowing it. Fine, I'll manage. She managed for approximately 40 minutes by reading the books available, which turned out to be a mix of business titles and design magazines, none of which were what she would have chosen, but all of which she could engage with, because Emma could engage with almost anything if the alternative was nothing. She was halfway through an article on sustainable architecture when the elevator opened and Evelyn Cross walked into the common area with her phone to her ear, clearly in the middle of a call, clearly expecting the space to be empty. They looked at each other. Emma lowered the magazine. Evelyn said into the phone, "I'm going to call you back," and lowered it. She looked at Emma. Emma looked at her. The particular assessment of an 8-year-old who has been thinking about a person for 5 weeks and has now encountered them in the wild was happening at full power, and Evelyn, who was not accustomed to being looked at quite this directly by someone quite this small, appeared to feel it. "You're Emma," Evelyn said. "You're Evelyn Cross," Emma said. Her voice was calm. "My dad's in a meeting." "I know, I have one too," said. Evelyn looked at the magazine in Emma's hands, the architecture article. "Is that any good?" "The photos are good. The text is kind of repetitive." Emma set it on the coffee table. "You're taller than I thought." "I've been told that." "Dad said you'd be here today." Evelyn paused. "He did?" "He said there was a meeting with Patricia Howe, and that you run the company Patricia Howe works for." Emma looked at her steadily. "He didn't say you'd be here specifically, but it seemed possible. And yet you came." Emma shrugged, the shrug of someone who does not particularly incriminate themselves. "He said I could come. I came." Evelyn stood for a moment in the middle of the common area with her phone in her hand and looked at this 8-year-old person who was watching her with the patient, open attention of someone who had decided to form an opinion from primary evidence rather than secondhand information. She crossed the room and sat down, not in the chair across from Emma, but in the chair at an angle to her, which felt less like an interview and more like a conversation. "The engineering scholarships," Emma said. "Yes?" "How many students?" "Currently, about 300 across 12 universities." Evelyn watched Emma receive this. "We're adding 4 more universities next year." Emma nodded, processed. "Do you read their papers, the students?" "Some of them. The ones who are published." She paused. "I have people who track the program outcomes. I see the summaries. But not the papers themselves." "Not usually." Emma was quiet for a moment. "My mom was an engineer," she said. Something moved through Evelyn's expression. Not pity, which would have been the wrong thing, but something more careful and more real. "I know," she said quietly. "Your dad mentioned. She died when I was 2. I don't remember her." Emma said it the way she said this particular fact. Not performing the weight of it, not performing the absence of weight either, just stating a true thing with the specific equanimity of someone who has lived with a loss long enough to carry it without collapsing under it. "But I know she was good at her work because Dad has some papers she wrote, and he showed me once." "What kind of engineering?" "Structural. She worked on bridges." Emma picked up the architecture magazine again, not to read it, but to hold. "I think I want to study something like that. Maybe." "You're 8. People decide early sometimes." Emma looked at her directly. "My dad decided at 18 he was going into the Navy. And what do you think about that?" Emma tilted her head. "About the Navy or about deciding early?" "Either. I think he was right about what he needed." On a pause, and then, with the specific quality Emma had when she said something she'd been sitting with for a while, "I think he's still figuring out what he needs now. Like the Navy version of him was a certain kind of person, and now he's a different person, and sometimes those two people argue inside him." She paused. "I'm 8. I might be wrong about that." Evelyn looked at Emma for a long moment. "I don't think you're wrong," she said. Emma seemed satisfied with this. She looked at the magazine. "What do you need?" she asked, with the directness of someone who considers this a normal question, which in Emma's conversational framework it apparently was. "Right now?" "In general." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. It was the kind of question that caught her the way the river question had caught her. The simple, direct thing that bypassed all the architecture she'd built around giving answers. "I think I need to be in fewer rooms where everything is managed," she said finally. "I spend a lot of time in rooms where everything is managed." Emma nodded, as if this confirmed something. "Dad's house isn't like that," she said. "It's kind of messy sometimes. He fixes things, but other things break, and he hasn't fixed them yet. The garage light has been out for a month." "That sounds normal." "It is normal." Emma looked at her. "You could come for dinner sometime, if you wanted." She said it the way she said things she'd thought about, casually, but with the specific deliberateness underneath. "I think Dad would be okay with it." Evelyn paused. "Did he say that?" "No, but I know him." A small pause. "I could ask him. Maybe," Evelyn started, and then the conference room door opened at the end of the hall, and Mark came out with Patricia, the two of them mid-sentence about something, and he looked up and saw Evelyn, and then looked at Emma, and the specific expression on his face in that moment was one that Evelyn would remember later. Not alarm, not anger, not the controlled neutral he deployed in professional contexts. Something more complicated than any of those. Recognition, maybe, of something he'd known was coming and hadn't fully prepared for. Emma looked at him with the expression of someone who was not hiding anything but had made peace with whatever was about to happen. "Hi," she said. He came the rest of the way down the hall. Patricia said her goodbyes with the professional efficiency of a woman who had understood the room and had places to be, and then it was just the three of them in the common area with the architecture magazine on the coffee table. "She was just sitting here," Evelyn said, before he could say anything. "I came for my own meeting. We started talking." "I figured." He looked at Emma. Emma looked back. "She told me about the scholarships." "I see. 300 students, 12 universities." She paused. 4 more next year. "Emma." "I'm just relaying information." She stood up, picked up the magazine, set it back neatly on the stack. "I'll wait by the elevator." She walked past them both with the particular composure of someone who has done the thing they came to do and is now gracefully exiting. Mark watched her go. Then he looked at Evelyn. "She knew you'd be here," he said. "Didn't she?" "I think she thought it was possible." Evelyn paused. "She's extraordinary." He looked at her steadily. "She knows it." "She asked me what I need." A pause. "I've been asked that question hundreds of times in professional contexts. By assistants, by consultants, by people whose job is to anticipate what I need before I know I need it." She looked toward the elevator where Emma was now standing with her back to them, scrolling through her phone, battery apparently having lasted. It felt different when she asked it. "She's good at that." He was quiet for a moment. "She invited you to dinner." "She mentioned it was possible." Evelyn held his gaze. "You don't have to say yes." "I know I don't have to say yes." He looked at Emma, then at Evelyn. "Saturday, 6 o'clock. We don't eat fancy." She almost said something about how she didn't need fancy, but stopped because she recognized that the sentence was unnecessary and possibly condescending. "Saturday?" she said instead. 6. He spent 4 days worrying about Saturday in the background of everything else, not in any articulate or productive way. It was the low-frequency anxiety of someone who has allowed something into the protected space of their life and is now doing the arithmetic of what that might mean. He cooked more carefully than he planned to. He cleaned the kitchen and the living room and caught himself cleaning the bathroom with the specific neurotic energy of a man who has decided that a guest's opinion of his grout is somehow meaningful, and then made himself stop because Emma was watching from the doorway with an expression that was doing its best to stay neutral. "The bathroom is fine," she said. "It was dirty." It really wasn't. "Emma, I'm just saying." She came in and sat on the edge of the tub, which was her preferred observation position for conversations he was trying not to have. "She's not coming to inspect the bathroom. She's coming to eat pasta." "Pasta's fine." "Can we have the one with the breadcrumbs?" "We're having that for the 3rd time this month." "It's good. She'll like it." Emma watched him put the cleaning supplies away. "Are you nervous?" "No." "You cleaned the bathroom." "The bathroom needed cleaning." Emma looked at him with the patience of a therapist who has heard this before. "It's okay to be nervous. It would be kind of weird if you weren't. He sat down on the closed toilet lid, which was not a dignified position, but it put him at her level. What made you invite her? Emma thought about it honestly, which she always did. She said she spends too much time in rooms where everything is managed, and our house isn't like that. She paused. And I thought maybe it would be good for her to see what a real dinner looks like. She's had dinners before. She's had dinners. I don't know if she's had dinners. Emma made a small distinction with her hands, the gesture she used for nuances that didn't have precise language. You know what I mean. He did know what she meant. You're very confident for someone who's never hosted a dinner. I've hosted your Navy friend Daniel. Daniel is a person I've known for 15 years who once ate your Halloween candy and apologized to you for a week. Emma smiled. The real one, not the composed one. He did feel really bad about that. He sent a card. A handwritten one. She stood up. It'll be fine, Dad. She's just a person. She's a person who is quite different from us. Emma paused in the doorway. Maybe that's fine too, she said. Different doesn't mean it can't work. She paused. Work like dinner. I mean dinner. I understood you. She left. He sat in the bathroom for another minute, which was not something he typically did, and thought about the specific strange shape that his life had taken in the last 5 weeks. The accretion of things he hadn't planned for, the gradual shift in the territory he'd carefully mapped out. He had built this life to be stable. He had built it to be sufficient. It was both of those things. It remained both of those things. And yet something had come in from outside and altered the light in it, the way weather altered light, making familiar shapes visible from new angles. He got up and started dinner. Evelyn arrived at 6:02, which he suspected was deliberate, slightly late enough to not seem eager, not late enough to be rude, the calibrated casualness of someone who had given thought to appearing uncalibrated. She brought wine, which was a normal thing, and a book, which was not, a hardcover about structural engineering bridges that she put on the kitchen counter without comment while she was taking her jacket off. Emma saw it immediately. She didn't say anything, just looked at it, then looked at Evelyn, and something happened in her expression that was quick and real, and not for anyone else. Dinner was pasta with breadcrumbs. It was good, because it was always good. Not because Mark had done anything differently, but because it was the kind of food that was its own argument for itself, simple and warm, the kind of thing that tasted like it had been made for a particular table rather than a particular impression. Evelyn ate it without commenting on the restaurant quality of it or the absence thereof. She ate like someone who was hungry, which he appreciated. Emma talked. This was not unusual. Emma talked at dinner. It was one of the reliable features of the household. But she talked differently than she did when it was just the two of them, with slightly more structure, slightly more consideration of her audience. She asked Evelyn about things she'd looked up. She told Evelyn about the bees and the bridges, and the book she'd read last week about women who had built things before building was considered something women did. She did not perform this. She was just interested, and interest in Emma was its own kind of gift. Evelyn talked back, not with the managed quality she brought to interviews or boardrooms or even, Mark had noticed, to most of their conversations. She relaxed into something less constructed, the same way the coffee question in the conference room had produced an answer she hadn't pre-processed. She told Emma about a bridge she'd driven over twice a week as a child, a small one in a town in Connecticut, and how she'd asked her mother who built it, and her mother had said someone who knew what they were doing, and she'd decided at 7 that that was the best possible thing to be said about work. Emma received this like a person receiving a valuable thing. She was quiet for a moment after, and then said, "Your mom sounds like she was cool." And Evelyn said, "She was exactly the right kind of difficult." And Emma said, "My dad's the same." "Hey," Mark said, "I mean it as a compliment." You don't say hey to compliments. You do when they're about being difficult. Emma looked at Evelyn. He argues with everything until he believes it. He doesn't just accept things. That's not always easy to live with, Evelyn said. No, Emma agreed. But it's honest. Mark looked at his daughter. She looked back with the expression of someone who has said a true thing and is comfortable with it. After dinner, Emma cleared the plates with the efficiency of long habit and then said she had reading to do, which was true and was also, Mark understood, a version of tact that he had not known she possessed until this exact moment. She took the bridge book from the counter and went upstairs, and the house settled into the specific quiet of a space with one fewer person in it. Evelyn was standing at the kitchen counter with her wine, looking at the wall where Mark had hung a small series of photographs. Emma, at various ages, one of Caroline in a hard hat on a job site, a landscape from a place he'd been once and never named to anyone. She was looking at the one of Caroline. "She's beautiful," she said. "Yes, Emma looks like her. Around the eyes." He was washing dishes, which was what he did after dinner, the routine of it. "Mostly Emma looks like herself." Evelyn was quiet. "How long has it been?" 6 years. She held her wine glass with both hands, something he'd noticed she did when she wasn't sure what to do with them. "Do you talk to Emma about her?" "Often. When Emma wants to." He paused. "Emma decides the pace of it. I follow her lead." Evelyn looked at the photograph for a moment longer. Then she turned away from it, not abruptly, just done, and came to stand near the counter where he was washing up, not close, but in the kitchen, in the space rather than at its edge. "This is the first time I've had dinner at someone's house in—" She paused. "I actually can't remember how long." He didn't say anything for a moment. "Is that what you meant? About managed rooms?" "Partly." She set her wine down on the counter. "After my father died, I took over the company at 26, and I was good at it, but I was also 26 and terrified, and the only way I knew how to be competent was to make everything controlled. The calendar, the environment, who had access to me, how much time I gave each thing." She paused. "And at some point, the control became the life. I'm not complaining about it. I chose it every day. But sometimes I want to eat pasta in a kitchen where the garage light is still out and someone's kid asks me what I need." She said it without performance, looking at the counter. "I forgot that was a thing that could happen." He turned off the tap and dried his hands and leaned against the counter across from her. "Emma said you should come back. She said it was possible." A slight pause. "She's diplomatic." "She's not usually diplomatic." "She was diplomatic with me." "That means she likes you." He said it simply. "She's hard on people she's indifferent to." Evelyn looked at him. Not the managed look, the other one, the one underneath it, that he'd seen a few times in these weeks and that was more complicated and more real. "Do you like me?" she asked. The directness of it surprised him slightly, which it shouldn't have, because she was direct. He was direct. They had been, in various ways, consistently direct with each other since the coffee shop. "I'm still figuring out what to do with you," he said honestly. She held his gaze. "That's fair? You're not what I expected." "What did you expect?" "Someone more certain of themselves, more finished." He paused, choosing it carefully. "You're certain in some directions. Not all of them." She was quiet for a moment. "No?" she said. "Not all of them." The house was quiet around them. Upstairs, Emma was reading. He could hear the faint sound of her moving, the creak of her bed, the specific noises of a child settling into a book. Outside, the November dark had come down early, and the garage light was out, and the neighbor's maple was bare against the sky. "The consulting work," he said. "Patricia says we can start after Thanksgiving." "I know, she told me." "Once that's done, there's no ongoing professional reason for contact." He said it clearly, which was the only way he said things. "That's going to be true in about 8 weeks. She looked at him. "I'm aware. I'm not saying it to push you out. I'm saying it because I want to be clear about what we're actually talking about." He held her gaze. "If there's going to be a reason for contact after that, it should be an honest one." She was quiet for a long moment, the wine glass on the counter between them, the photograph of Caroline on the wall, the specific ordinary weight of a kitchen in the evening with the dishes done and the food gone and something still unfinished in the room. "I would like to come back to this kitchen," she said. "Not a performance, not managed." That's the honest reason. He looked at her for a moment, then he said, "The garage light. I'll fix it this weekend." She looked at him, and then she laughed. An actual laugh, unmanaged, shorter than the feeling behind it, surprised out of her by the specific mundanity of the response. And it was the best sound he'd heard in this kitchen since Emma's laugh, which was the best sound in the world. You don't have to fix it for me, she said. I know, it's been out a month. He straightened up. You want more wine? Yes, she said. He poured it. They stood in the kitchen in the ordinary way, not touching, not performing anything, just two people in a room that was the right temperature and smelled like pasta and didn't require anything from either of them. And the November dark pressed against the windows and didn't get in. Upstairs, Emma was almost certainly not reading anymore. She was almost certainly listening to the sound of the kitchen, the particular quality of two people being in a room together in a way that didn't need management, and finding it good. She would not say this. She would come down in the morning and eat cereal and ask if there was more pasta and not mention any of it directly. But she would smile when he wasn't quite looking, the small private smile she saved for things that had gone the way she hoped. And he would notice it because he noticed everything about her. And he would say nothing either, and they would both know. The garage light got fixed on a Sunday morning in late November, 2 days after Evelyn's first dinner. Mark did it the way he did all household repairs. Methodically, without drama, with the particular focus of someone who found a certain satisfaction in small mechanical problems that had clear solutions. He replaced the bulb, tested the fixture, determined the fixture itself was corroded at the connection, replaced the connection, tested it again. It took 40 minutes. Emma watched from the garage doorway with a cup of cereal, not because the process was interesting, but because she watched him do things sometimes, a habit she'd had since she was small. Just present, just nearby, the specific comfort of proximity that didn't require conversation. When the light came on, she said, "She's going to think you did that for her." "I did it because it's been out a month." Emma ate a piece of cereal. "Sure." He put the tools away. The garage light held. It was a small thing, and it was also not a small thing, in the way that most small things aren't, when you look at them honestly. The consulting work with Patricia Howe began the Monday after Thanksgiving and proceeded with the efficiency of two people who communicated well and had no interest in wasting each other's time. Mark delivered the curriculum addendum in sections. The new module structure first, then the practice component methodology, then the credentialing standard. And Patricia reviewed each section with the focused attention of someone who had been waiting for exactly this material and was not going to pretend otherwise. They met twice a week in the co-working space, rarely longer than 90 minutes, and the work was good. Not in the inflated sense that people describe work when they want to feel important about it. Good in the plain sense, the way a properly installed connection is good. The way a solution that actually solves the problem is good. Evelyn was peripheral to it, not absent. She received summaries from Patricia. She asked occasional clarifying questions through the proper channel. She was the reason any of it existed, but peripheral by design, both hers and his. She respected the boundary between the professional arrangement and everything else with a precision that he had not entirely expected, given that she was someone who tended to operate at the center of things. She came back to the kitchen on 2 more Saturdays before Christmas. The first time she brought nothing. He noticed this and understood it. The wine the first time had been a social convention, the correct thing to bring to a dinner invitation. And she had understood coming back that the correct thing was not the point. She arrived at 6, ate the food he made, talked to Emma about a design competition Emma had found online for middle schoolers interested in structural engineering. Emma was 2 years away from being eligible, had already bookmarked the registration page, was thinking about it with the forward planning instinct she applied to everything she cared about. Evelyn knew 2 people on the competition's judging panel. She did not offer to call them. She described the judges' professional backgrounds in a way that was useful to Emma's preparation, which was a different thing and the right thing. Mark noticed this too. He filed it. The second Saturday she was late. 20 minutes, no message in advance, and when she arrived she looked the way she looked when something had happened that she was managing while simultaneously not letting it show, which he was learning to read. He asked, after Emma had gone to read, what had happened. She told him. A board member had resigned that afternoon publicly with a statement that accused her of strategic decisions that prioritized growth over ethical sourcing in the company's supply chain. It was not a new accusation. The sourcing issue had been a problem she'd inherited and was 6 months into resolving. But the public nature of it was new, and the timing was bad. "Is it true?" he asked. Not the accusation of wrongdoing. He meant the underlying issue, the sourcing problem. She looked at him directly. "The problem is real. The accusation that I've ignored it is not. I've been working on it since I identified it, which was 8 months ago. A pause. The board member knew this. He chose to resign publicly rather than let the correction happen quietly, because a quiet correction doesn't generate the kind of attention that advances his next move. What's his next move? Starting a competing fund that positions itself as ethically superior. He needs a villain. She held his gaze. This week, I'm the villain. He was quiet for a moment. Are you going to fight it publicly? Yes, with documentation. She paused. It's not going to be pleasant. Things that need doing usually aren't. She looked at him. Is that the naval philosophy? It's just true. He paused. Do you need anything from this conversation, or do you need the conversation to be about something else? She blinked. He'd asked her this question once before, directly, practically, without the performed sensitivity that most people brought to difficult moments. And she'd told him afterward that it was the most useful thing anyone had said to her in years. Not because it was profound, but because it was honest, and because it gave her a choice. Something else, she said. Emma's bridge project. She's been trying to figure out the load distribution model, and she's been doing it on paper, which is, can I see it? He brought it down from Emma's desk. 3 pages of careful, hand-drawn calculations in Emma's precise, slightly too small handwriting. Evelyn looked at them for a long moment without saying anything, and her expression was one he hadn't seen on her before, unguarded in a way that was not professional or social, but something quieter, the expression of a person looking at something that connects to something they love. Her instincts are right, she said finally. The load distribution approach is correct. The calculation on page 2 has an error. She's carrying a decimal wrong. I thought so, but I didn't want to tell her. Evelyn looked at him. Why not? Because she'll want to find the error herself once she knows it's there. If I tell her where it is, she'll fix it. If I tell her there is one, she'll find it and it'll stick. He paused. She needs to own the correction. Evelyn held his gaze for a moment. That's good parenting, she said. It's just knowing her. She looked back at the calculations. Can I write a note on it? Just a question in the margin. Something that points her toward where to look without telling her what to find. He thought about this. She'll know it was you. I know. Is that okay? He considered. Emma had asked Evelyn to come back. Emma had chosen this. Yes, he said. Evelyn wrote 1 sentence in the margin of page 2. A question, 3 words, pointed and clean, and set the papers back on the table. He would put them on Emma's desk in the morning. Emma would find the note and find the error, and would come downstairs with the expression she had when she'd solved something that mattered. And she would not make a big thing of it, but he would know. That was how December moved. In pieces, in ordinary increments, the way lives actually move rather than the way they move in the stories people tell about them afterward. The consulting work, the kitchen Saturdays, the things unsaid and the things said plainly, the garage light that worked now. Emma's bridge calculations on the desk, the particular shape of something being built without a plan, from the materials available, which is the only way the real things ever get built. The curriculum addendum was completed in the 2nd week of January. Mark delivered the final section to Patricia on a Tuesday morning, and she read the last pages while he sat across from her in the conference room, which she always did with his sections. Read them in front of him rather than promising to review them later, because she was the kind of person who did not store things she could resolve immediately. She made 2 small notes in the margins. Then she put the pen down. This is good work, she said. Thank you. I mean it seriously. We've had external consultants on various projects for 11 years. The credentialing standard alone is going to change how we hire trainers for the next decade. She paused. I'm going to recommend to Mrs. Cross that we extend the arrangement. He had been thinking about this. He had been thinking about it since the module structure section, when he'd realized that the work was more interesting to him than he'd allowed himself to anticipate. Not because of Evelyn, or not only, because of the specific problem, the gap in the 0 to 90-second window, the thing he'd spent years seeing from the field side, and had never had the opportunity to address from the design side. I'd consider an extension, he said, with conditions. Patricia smiled the short, genuine smile. Of course you would. She folded her hands. Tell me the conditions. The The scope stays defined, not open-ended consulting. Specific projects with specific deliverables. I don't want to be in the building full-time. I don't want a title. The remote arrangement worked fine. And I want the program to actually run, not to sit in a proposal file. He met her eyes. If we spend another 6 months on curriculum and it never gets delivered, I'm done. Reasonable. She paused. For what it's worth, I've already been in conversations with 3 partner companies about piloting the new module. There's real appetite for it. This is not going into a file. He nodded. Then yes. Conditionally, yes. You really do like that word. It's a precise word. She stood and extended her hand. He shook it. I'll have the extension terms drafted. Same rate. She picked up the folder. Mr. Reynolds, the work you did in the restaurant, and I'm aware this is the 3rd time someone has said this to you. 4th, it's going to become a teaching case. The exact scenario is going in the opening section of the new module. Not with your name, not with any identifying details, but the specifics of it, the recognition, the response time, the outcome, as the model of what the 0 to 90-second window actually looks like when someone does it right. She paused. I wanted you to know that. He was quiet for a moment. Anonymized. Completely. He thought about a moment in a restaurant that had lasted 12 seconds and had rearranged everything after it. He thought about what it might mean for that moment to become instructional material, to be extracted from his life and placed in a room where people learning something real could look at it and understand what was possible. Okay, he said. Well, the pilot program launched in March. 3 companies, 240 employees across 4 sessions. Mark was not in the room for any of them. The trainers had been credentialed in January, the material was theirs to deliver, the methodology was embedded in the curriculum. He was the architect of the thing, not the resident of it, which was what he'd wanted. He knew how it went from Patricia's reports, which she sent with the unfussy efficiency he'd come to rely on. Response rates were high. Post-session assessments showed a statistically significant improvement in the 0 to 90-second response rate, the specific metric they'd identified as the gap. In the second session of the 3rd company's pilot, a participant used the technique on a colleague who had collapsed during a group activity. The colleague had a cardiac event, not a choking incident, but the principle applied. The person closest moved before anyone else processed what was happening, moved with a competence they'd acquired 48 hours earlier, and the colleague was alive and coherent when the paramedics arrived. Patricia put this in the report without editorializing. She was not an editorializing person, but the facts sat in the middle of the page and said everything it needed to say about why any of this mattered. Mark read it at the kitchen table. Emma was at school. The house was quiet. He sat with the report for a long time, not reading it again, just sitting with what it contained. He thought about the restaurant, the 47 people who had the same potential he had that night and who had stood still in the gap, not because they were bad people, not because they didn't care, but because nobody had ever given them the concrete physical understanding of what to do with their hands in the 12 seconds that mattered. He had not thought of himself as someone who possessed a rare thing. He had thought of himself as someone who had been trained in a thing, which was different. Training was transferable. That was the whole point. He thought about Caroline in a hard hat on a job site. He thought about a bridge in Connecticut that a 7-year-old had asked about. He thought about the specific human need to build things that hold weight, literally, structurally, in all the ways that mattered. He called Evelyn. She picked up on the second ring. He could hear in the background the ambient noise of her office, the particular texture of a workday in progress. I read the report, he said. A pause. I read it too. Her voice had something in it that was not the professional register, not the managed one. The other one, the one he'd been hearing more of in the kitchen on Saturday evenings. The cardiac incident. Yes. Patricia said they're already getting inquiries from 4 more companies. Another pause. She wants to expand the pilot. I know. She called me this morning. What did you say? I said I needed to think about it. He paused. I'm telling you because it affects the scope of what I agreed to. I want you to know before I tell her yes. A longer pause. You're going to say yes. Probably. Because it's working. Because it's working, he said. And then, because he was the kind of person who said the thing when it was true. And because the work is worth doing, past the contract, past the arrangement, it's worth doing on its own. He heard her breath shift slightly. I know, she said. I've known that since I read your first set of margin notes. A pause. Mark, I want to talk to you about something, not on the phone. Saturday? Saturday is fine. A pause. I'm going to bring something. Is that okay? Depends what it is. It's not wine. Another pause, and then the slight warmth that came through sometimes when she wasn't managing. It's something Emma asked about. He thought about his daughter, who asked about everything, and had apparently been asking Evelyn things on a channel he wasn't fully monitoring. What did she ask about? She asked me if I knew anyone at MIT's structural engineering department. A pause. I know the department head personally. We went to the same... She stopped. She asked if they ever did anything for prospective students who were very young and very serious. He sat with this for a moment. Emma was 9 now. MIT was 9 years away, which was both a very long time and no time at all, which was the particular mathematics of watching a child grow up. You didn't have to do that, he said. I know I didn't have to. Her voice was even. She asked. I had something useful to offer. Those 2 things were enough. He looked at the kitchen wall, at the place where the photographs hung. Caroline in the hard hat, the landscape, Emma at various ages. He thought about a woman looking at those photographs on a November evening and saying someone who knew what they were doing was the best thing to say about work. Saturday, he said. Saturday? She confirmed. She came at 5:30, which was earlier than 6, which was different from before. Not dramatically, just the small shift of a thing that has stopped needing to calibrate its approach. She had a folder. She gave it to Emma at the door before she'd even taken her jacket off, which made Emma look at the folder and then at Evelyn and then at her father with the expression of someone trying to stay composed about something they have strong feelings about. Inside the folder was the printed email exchange, 3 messages, between Evelyn and a woman named Dr. Sylvia Okafor, who was, according to the email signature, the chair of the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering at MIT. The exchange was brief and professional. It described a summer research exposure program for high school-age students with demonstrated interest in structural engineering. It noted that there was no minimum age requirement for the program's introductory track, only a demonstrated portfolio of work. It noted that Dr. Okafor would be happy to review preliminary materials from a prospective future applicant as a courtesy to Ms. Cross, with the understanding that formal application would occur through standard channels when the time was appropriate. Emma read this twice. Then she set the folder on the kitchen counter with the precise deliberateness of someone handling something they consider important. I'd need to build a portfolio, she said. The bridge calculations are a start, Evelyn said. The ones with the corrected load distribution model. Emma looked at her. You saw the correction. Your dad told me you found it yourself. Emma looked at her father. I told her there was one, he said. I didn't tell you where. Emma stood with this for a moment, the information traveling through whatever internal system she used to process the specific category of things that adults did for her that she hadn't asked for out loud but had needed. Then she picked the folder back up and held it with both hands. Thank you, she said to Evelyn. It was direct and unadorned and was worth more than most of the thank yous Evelyn had received in her professional life, which had been extensive. It's just a door, Evelyn said. You have to walk through it yourself. I know. Emma looked at the folder again. I will. She took the folder upstairs with the focused intention of someone who already knew what she was going to do next, and the kitchen settled into the specific quiet that it settled into when Emma had left a room, present in her absence, shaped by her. Evelyn stood in the middle of the kitchen. She had her jacket half on, still, the sleeve caught, and she worked it free with the slightly impatient efficiency of someone who is more comfortable in motion than in stillness, but has been learning, incrementally, the value of the other thing. Mark poured 2 glasses of water and set one on the counter near her, which she took without ceremony. The program expansion, she said. Before you tell Patricia yes, I want to put something to you, officially. She straightened up, not as the woman who comes to your kitchen on Saturdays, as the person running a company that has identified a significant gap in public safety training and has the resources to address it at scale. He was quiet, listening. The three-company pilot is a proof of concept. The data from it is strong enough to take to the insurance industry, to OSHA, to 3 federal agencies that fund workplace safety initiatives. If we take it there, if we build the program into something that operates nationally, rather than through individual corporate partnerships, the reach is different by an order of magnitude. She held his gaze. That requires a different kind of involvement from the person who designed the methodology. Not full-time, not a title you don't want, but a named advisory role, public, that can be cited in the federal applications, your name attached to the methodology. My name being public, he said. Yes. She said it without apology. I know that's the thing you've been specifically trying to avoid. I know it's the reason you paid cash at a restaurant and used a prepaid phone for a reservation. She set her water glass down. I'm not asking you to undo that. I'm asking you to decide whether the thing that work is worth outweighs the thing you were protecting. He looked at her. What's the upside? Specifically, federal funding for a national rollout would mean the training reaches approximately 40,000 workers in the first year. Private sector expansion on top of that puts the estimate at 100,000 in 3 years. The cardiac incident in the pilot, she paused, that's one person. In 3 years, at that scale, we're talking about dozens, maybe more. The data on bystander response intervention is very clear about what training does to outcomes. He was quiet for a long time, not performing consideration, actually in it, the real kind, the kind where you look at a thing from all its sides and don't hurry toward a conclusion because the conclusion is going to be permanent. He thought about Emma in a school that 2 people had visited looking for her father. He thought about the garage light and the kitchen table and the life he had built by design and what design was supposed to protect and whether protection was the same as limitation and whether he had ever actually been able to separate those 2 things cleanly. He thought about a moment in a restaurant. 12 seconds. The specific accident of being present, trained, and willing. The convergence of those 3 things that had nothing to do with him being special and everything to do with him being ready. If 40,000 people were ready, 40,000 moments became possible. That was just arithmetic. I'll want to approve how my background is described, he said. Navy service, private security consulting, no operational details. Of course. Emma's name doesn't appear in any of it, in any context. Never. And if the media attention that comes with this affects her school, her life, I pull back. Immediately. No argument. Evelyn held his gaze. I understand. Then yes, he said. Conditionally, yes. She almost smiled. You never just say yes. I say yes when the conditions are met. The conditions are met. She picked up her water glass again, and he picked up his, and they stood in the kitchen in the particular way they stood in the kitchen, not performing anything, not managing the space between them, just 2 people who had arrived at something without planning the route and had found it was real. I want to say something, Evelyn said, and I want to say it once, directly, and then I'm not going to say it again. He waited. When I was on that table in the restaurant trying to breathe, she stopped, and the stopping was not for effect. It was because the memory had physical weight, and it always would. The world went very small. Everything I owned, everything I'd built, everyone who worked for me, the board, the company, the portfolio, none of it was in that room. What was in that room was my hands on a tablecloth and the fact that I was running out of time. He was still. And then you were there. She held his gaze steadily. And I don't think you understand. I don't think you've let yourself understand what it meant that you moved. Not that you knew how, that you moved. That in a room full of people who were thinking about it, calculating, managing their own response, you were already there. She paused. That's not training. Training is the how, the why you move before anyone else, and that's something else. He was quiet for a long moment. Outside the kitchen window, the January dark had come down early, and the yard was bare, and the neighbor's maple was nothing but structure against a gray sky, stripped to its essential shape. I didn't think about it, he said. I know. That's the part I mean. He looked at her. She looked back. They had been, in various ways, looking at each other since November with the specific honesty of two people who had both, at different points in their lives, learned that pretending was expensive and had decided they couldn't afford it. What was in the room between them was not simple and was not finished and was not going to resolve into something clean because the real things didn't resolve into something clean. They resolved into something lived in, something that required maintenance, something that had good days and days where the decimal was wrong and needed finding. "Emma's going to want dinner soon," he said. "What are we having?" "I was thinking the pasta." "With the breadcrumbs." "With the breadcrumbs." She nodded. "I'll set the table." She knew where things were because she had been here before, and he had not hidden anything from her, and she did not ask permission to know her way around a kitchen that had, in the particular way that spaces absorb the people who return to them, begun to hold a version of her shape. She got the plates. He started the water. Emma came downstairs at 6 with the folder under her arm. She had apparently already begun annotating it, her handwriting visible in the margins, the same precise, too small lettering that appeared in everything she wrote. She saw the plates being set and sat down without being asked and put the folder beside her plate, within arm's reach. "Dad," she said, watching him cook. "Yeah. If I send preliminary materials to Dr. Okafor in the spring, do you think she'll actually read them? Or is it like a courtesy thing where someone else reads them and summarizes?" "Ask Evelyn." Emma turned to Evelyn, who was folding napkins with the slightly imprecise care of someone learning a domestic routine they hadn't practiced much, but were taking seriously. "Will she actually read them?" "Sylvia Okafor reads everything herself," Evelyn said. "She's told me 3 times that delegation is for people who don't trust their own judgment. She reads everything." Emma processed this with satisfaction. "Good." She looked at the folder. "Then I need the calculations to be right." "They will be," Evelyn said. "You found the error." "I found the error because someone asked the right question." Emma looked at her with the directness that was entirely her own. "Thank you for that." Evelyn set a folded napkin on the table. "You're welcome." The water started to boil. Mark put the pasta in. Emma opened the folder and went back to her annotations, the pen moving in small, careful increments across the margins of the MYT email, the mind behind it already somewhere ahead of the present moment, planning the bridge she was going to build. This is the thing about people who move, and this is the truth that the story carries, if it carries anything. It was never about the ones who were strongest or richest or most prepared. It was about the ones who, when the moment arrived, did not stop to calculate whether moving was worth it. The calculation happens after, in the rearrangement, in the things that grow from the single act the way trees grow from whatever falls in the gap. Not planned, not designed, just reaching toward what's available. Mark Reynolds had moved in a restaurant on a Wednesday night in October because he had been trained to, yes, but training was only the how. Underneath the how was something simpler, something that couldn't be taught because it was already there, so the belief that the person across the room mattered enough to cross to. That was it. That was the whole thing. That was what the curriculum was trying to build into people who didn't yet have it. The specific interior posture of a person who has decided, in advance of any particular moment, that the answer to should I move is always yes. Not because it was noble, not because someone was watching, because across the room a person needed air. And you had the means, and the only thing standing between those two facts was 12 seconds and the willingness to cover the distance. 40,000 people, 100,000. The numbers would grow and the moments would accumulate, and each one would be someone's October Wednesday, someone's 12 seconds, and none of the people who lived because of it would ever know that it started here. In a restaurant, in a corner booth, with a man and his daughter eating duck they hadn't eaten before, and a woman across the room who ran out of time and ran into the particular accident of someone being present and trained and willing. In the kitchen, the pasta cooked. Emma wrote in her margins. Evelyn set the last fork on the table and stood back and looked at the arrangement with the slight perfectionist tilt of someone deciding whether it was correct, then deciding it was good enough, which was its own kind of progress for her. Mark turned from the stove and looked at the two of them, the 8-year-old with the folder, the woman learning to set a table like it mattered, the ordinary, unremarkable kitchen where nothing was managed, and the garage light worked and the photographs on the wall held the people who were gone alongside the evidence of the people who remained. This was not what he had built his life toward. He had built his life toward quiet, toward sufficient, toward the particular piece of a small life lived with full attention. He had not built it toward this. But this was what one moment had built, not despite the life he'd made, but from it, using exactly what he was, exactly where he'd arrived, exactly the specific person that 12 years and a navy and a wife he'd loved and a daughter he'd made the center of everything had produced. You couldn't have gotten here from anywhere else. That was the part that was hard to articulate, and that he felt most clearly in moments like this one. That the path made sense only from the end of it, looking back, the way a bridge makes sense when you're on it, not when you're choosing the materials. "It's ready," he said. Emma closed the folder. Evelyn pulled out a chair. The three of them sat down at the kitchen table in the ordinary dark of a January evening and ate.